probably over their mag almost certainly. And this is going to affect some planning in GMA 9 and perhaps GMA 10. GMA 10 is long considered GMA 9 as a contributing zone for the Edwards Aquifer and parts of the GMA 10 area. So we're really concerned about how this may affect our mag and our desired future conditions. The Trinity Glen Rose Groundwater District, in their enabling legislation, had some exemptions granted to many existing wells, about 40 or so, I think. And those exemptions amount to about 80 or 90% of the water withdrawn from the Trinity Aquifer in Bexar County. So it's a significant exemption, and it really restricts their ability to manage the aquifer. The Trinity Glen Rose Groundwater District is looking at working with LBG Guyton and Associates to update the Northern Bexar County modeling package, the modeling groundwater availability models, and to understand the local pumping effects. So it's going to be important to find out what effects, if any, pro or con, on the additional pumping from the Trinity Aquifer and how it may affect the Trinity Aquifer in Northern Bexar County and perhaps even the cross-formational flow into the Edwards Aquifer. So it's a big concern. We realize that Regional probably can't do much about it right now. We're all kind of waiting to see what this additional modeling studies and efforts will produce, but we want to let y'all know that GMA 9 is tracking this, we're aware of it, and we're concerned about the potential impact on our DFC and whether or not the Trinity Glen Rose District will be able to achieve its desired future condition and work within the MAG that they have available. So just a heads up, we'll update you as time passes and more information becomes available. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I have just a quick question, just to understand. So the wells are not permitted. They don't require permitting.
They're exempt. They're exempted
Okay.
by legislative action on the enabling legislation for the Trinity Glen Rose Groundwater District. And there's, I think, about 40 or so wells. Don't hold me to that number because I'm not with the Trinity Glen Rose
Okay.
District yet. But that's approximately what we're looking at, and they are exempt. And it's hard to manage a resource when it's exempt. So.
Are the 40 wells, is part of their production committed to anybody yet? Or is
Saws has a contract with them. Last year, I think Saws pumped about, actually 14,548 foot was last year's production. And they have a contract for up to 17. So some of it is committed, but that leaves an additional 15,000 acre feet, which is pretty significant.
how long is the contract with?
I have no idea.
Any other questions? Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
We'll be back with more information as it becomes available. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Alan Montemayor.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you once again. I welcome the opportunity to participate in the democratic process and speak to you today. Much of what you guys do here is long-range thinking, and it's centered around the economics of water. So I wanted to read a quote from Henry Hazlitt, a famous economist. The art of economics consists in looking not merely at the immediate, but at the longer effects of any act or policy. It consists in tracing the consequences of that policy, not merely for one group, but for all groups. And that is what I think this group is potentially very effective at doing, is looking out for the long-term interests of many different groups here in South Texas, and I truly appreciate it. So I'm here today to very briefly speak about SAW's water management plan. For some, I will be preaching to the choir. For others, I will be rankling. I apologize for that. There's much to be admired in SAW's water management plan. Their use of the aquifer storage and recovery facility is groundbreaking. It's a wonderful thing, we think, for San Antonio. Their desalination facility is maybe unique in the nation for what it will do for San Antonio, and there's room for improvement in that even. But other aspects of their water management plan need a lot of work. As I've spoken to this group before, their pursuit of the water from remote areas is really not in the long-term interest of San Antonio or of South Texas for that matter. The Vista Ridge project in particular, pumping water from 142 miles away, we believe is not sustainable. We believe that it's put in place to provide 50,000 acre-feet of water for San Antonio, of new water. Water that San Antonio does not really need. SAWS has overstated the need for that water, and indeed this is proven by the fact that they're now trying to sell that water to other entities, as everyone in this room is very, very aware of. We believe that in place of doing projects like this, that essentially follow the California model of grabbing water from everywhere you can get in order to facilitate the expansion of the city. It's growing fast enough as it is, but we don't really need to show that San Antonio is a place of abundant water. SAWS has even adopted a new logo that says San Antonio is waterful. Well, you know, by adopting this idea that says that there's plenty of water here, we can keep growing forever, it follows their idea of sustainability, and that is sustaining expansion forever. And we all know that cannot continue to happen. There's another quote that I want to read to you, and that is by a famous French economist. His name was Frederick Bastiat. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in a society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. And I believe that this quote embodies the Vista Ridge Project and SAWS' approach to the Vista Ridge Project. SAWS says that they want each of the groundwater districts to be able to manage their own water. And yet their activities, when they go and lobby for the legislature to restrict the ability of groundwater districts to manage their own water, speaks against that. So I ask you two things today, and that is, number one, that you look out for the long-term interests of all your constituents, not just necessarily the growth aspects of your constituents, and that number two, you keep SAWS in check in their aspirations to become the water purveyors and the controllers of water in South Texas. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have anybody else that signed up to speak at this time, so we'll move on to the agenda, to the next item, which is the approval of the minutes from the August 3rd meeting. I did want to bring to your attention, as you all probably noted when you read the minutes, that we had some technical difficulties with our recorder. So after, if you look at the bottom of, I guess if you want to, page 3 of the minutes, Cole wrote in italics that we had the recorder went out, and so the rest of the agenda minutes were put together through notes, his notes, and other information that he gathered during the meeting. So just wanted to make that, and we have a double recorder today, just to make sure that we're not having that same issue again, but it just, something happened with the recorder. So just wanted to make that note. So can I entertain a motion for approval of the minutes?
So moved.
All right, is there a second? All right, that was great. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, great, thank you. The minutes are approved. The next item, the status on the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan. I believe Nathan is not going to be here today, so we do not have a report on this unless there's anybody else that has some new news on anything. Roland, do you have anything to report?
There's nothing really new.
Okay, all right, great. The next item is the report from the Guadalupe San Antonio BBAS. And I just wanted to include, it's included in your packet under item number 4. As y'all are aware, there was some funding that was approved for continuation of some of the studies from work plans throughout the state, from VBASC throughout the state. And the Water Development Board asked each of the VBASC to submit what those priority study topics would be. So we facilitated a process within the VBASC to go through that process, and in your documents here is what we submitted as it related to those priority study topic areas. And as of yesterday, I don't think that the request for proposals has actually been put out officially by the Water Development Board. Is that correct still? So we are waiting for that, so that, and depending on how they put that together, then we will be soliciting, the Water Development Board will be soliciting proposals. Not quite sure exactly how these study topics will be identified in the RFP, or what was submitted by any of the other VBASC areas, but this is what we had put together. Does anyone have any questions? And Greg did our work for us back here from SAWS, so if y'all have any specific questions, I'm sure he'd be helpful in answering.
Susanna,
Yes.
I just wanted to inform the group, I kind of keep up with Region K. Andy Sansom serves on Region K, and his alternate, Steve Box, puts out a newsletter. And so I learned that they are requesting to fund, in this same process, some gain-loss studies, and I thought that might be of interest to our group.
Okay. Terrific. Well, if you have any questions about any of this, please let me know, and we can, give you additional information. But the process is moving, and the idea was to try to expedite it this time so that the studies can begin sooner, and hopefully that's the case with the RFP coming out as soon as possible. All right. Next is our report from Ron Ellis. There's several issues I think he wants to report on.
Good morning, everyone. I do have a number of issues. I'll try to keep it brief, but please let me know if you have questions. First of all, there may be an announcement today. I'm not sure what the timing is, but the SWIFT process is coming up. The most I know right now is we anticipate that the deadlines will be very similar for the abridged application process as they have been in the past cycles, which would be the abridged application process opens about December 1st, and that those applications are due by about February 1st. So that's what we anticipate. I had also received a question about SWIFT projects in past cycles for Region L. So real briefly, I'm going to go through those. For 2015, there were 3 projects for Region L. One was Canyon Regional Water Authority for $42 million, was the Wells Ranch Phase 2 well field and transmission line. Another was Hayes Holdwell Public Utility Agency, now known as Alliance Water. That was Phase 1A transmission line of their project, and it was $7,490,000. And then also GBRA's Integrated Seawater and Power Plant Project at $2 million. That's a creeping, oh no, that one is active. Then in 2016, the Shirt Seguin Local Government Corporation's expanded Carrizo project was funded $66,500,000. And the 2017 projects, the commitments have been made. These projects haven't closed yet, but the 2 projects in 2017 for Region L was the Hayes Caldwell Public Utility Agency, again, Alliance Water, And it was, actually, it's one project that was split into two phases, it looks like, at $144,395,000, and then $69 million for participation. Any questions about the SWIFT process or past funding?
So explain that one again. They got both of that, the 144 million and the 69 million both went to the Alliance Water project?
That's correct. The 69 million portion is board participation, which is the board, let me see if I can explain this well. If the board funds part of that project for future expansion of the project, it allows an entity to build at a larger capacity than their current need. And then when they do have that need and they have to utilize that additional capacity, they pay back that portion of it. So the board is a participating part of the project for a part of the project timeframe. Okay, so we have regularly regional financial assistance workshops, and there is one coming up on November 7th in Yoakum. It's at the TxDOT training room at 403 Huck Street in Yoakum, Texas. It's at 10 a.m. on November 7th. If these workshops are the opportunity for entities to come in and talk to board staff about the types of financing programs that we have, and there's the opportunity to, board staff will do a presentation, an overview of our programs, and then there's the opportunity for one-on-one discussions with board staff who work on the lending process and who can walk entities through what they would need to do and how they might benefit from the loan products that the board offers. Okay, so on October 3rd, we sent out an email on following up on the Open Meetings Act and the Public Information Act and how they apply to the planning process now after Senate Bill 347 became effective in September. I'll go through some key points. I think all of you received that email, and we've had some questions and answers from this group and other groups. I think that we're in a good place on this. I'll go through some key points, but please ask and we can have more discussion if necessary. So there is Open Meetings Act training and Public Information Act training on the Attorney General's website. Planning group members need to take that training, and the planning group or the political subdivision, Sarah, needs to document somehow that training's been taken. Now, with the Public Information Act only, the planning group can designate a person or an entity as the responsible party for the whole group. That entity or that person would be responsible for responding to any Public Information Act, public information requests of the planning group, and that person would be the only person that needs to do that training. But with the Open Meetings Act training, all of the board's position, opinion, if you will, on it is that all of the voting members should take that 1-hour training, and it should be documented. The other key provision that applies is that, or the key change, is that subcommittee meetings now are subject to notice, and they need to be public meetings. So anytime there's a work group put together, then there will need to be notice under the Open Meetings Act in that work group meeting so that the public is aware and the public has an opportunity to participate. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just a couple questions about that. So it also said in the document that you sent out that some people may have already taken the open meetings training as part of their other jobs, and that could apply to this requirement. But I guess my question is, how old how far back? Because I know the Public Information, the Open Meetings Act changes from time to time based on new legislation. And what's the advice from the Water Development Board on that? Should we just everybody re-up regardless, or is there a certain time frame that would still be permissible?
So I'm afraid I don't know what the Attorney General's time frame on the training is if it expires. Some of you might know if you are required to do it. That we would have to defer to the Attorney General's, their website will tell what the expiration is. If anyone has done the training as part of another position, if you're on a board that is subject to Open Meetings Act and you've had to take this training, that you don't have to take it again if it's still current. And I'm sorry, but I don't even know if it expires at all. So I would say if you have it and it's current, there's not a reason to do it again. Just provide the documentation that training has been done.
Is the documentation something that you get from the Attorney General website?
Yes, it's approximately, each of the trainings is an approximately 1 hour video. At the end of the video, the presenter says, click on this link and put in this code and you can print a certificate.
So I think that what we're gonna try to do, and I don't know if we can take this action during this item or not, but what we had talked about is that if you get the certificate, because even if you've taken the training before and you have the certificate, then you can submit that and we'll decide whether we'll ask if there's a time frame on its eligibility. But if you have it, it would be good to submit it to Cole. But otherwise, we would need everybody to go through the exercise online. And I believe in your email, it said 90 days from September 1st.
That's correct.
So that would be by the first of the year. Is that correct? That would be October, November,
By the 1st of December.
1st of December, I'm sorry,
Yes.
1st of December, because it was September 1. So by the 1st of December, we would have to submit to you.
Actually, let me clarify. You don't need to submit it to us.
But I mean, do you need to know that we've met the, no?
Now, ultimately, it's the planning group's responsibility to manage this and be responsible for compliance. That the email that we sent with the information from our general counsel, is kind of an unusual thing because we really can't give legal advice to the planning groups and the planning group political subdivisions on how they should comply with these laws. But we felt like this was a pretty big change and it was important to, give some guidance. Ultimately, it's up to the political subdivision and your legal staff to ensure that you're compliant.
Okay, so then probably what I guess we would need to discuss as a group here is everyone going through the training, either if you already have the certificate, forward it or copy it or scan it and send it to Cole. And if you haven't done it or done it recently, then I would, we need to do this before the end of November and submit that to Cole. He'll send out an email to remind everybody, but if you just go to there's a link, you just sit there for an hour and go through it. You can do it at home, you can do it on wherever it's convenient to you. But I think it would be very important for us to be compliant in this regard. So I think it would be, Cole will send out an email to remind everybody. We also discussed that the public information designation, is that something that we need to take an action on, or can we just do that informally?
I think you can do all of this informally. I
Okay.
don't think that the planning board needs to take action.
So we would, at this time, it would make sense because Cole is the one that does all of the notifications, is required, it puts all the agenda packets together. Anytime we've had public information requests in the past, he has handled them. So I would suggest that he would be the person that would get the Public Information Act training, and or whomever would serve in his position in the future. I mean, obviously, it would be he or the other person that's serving in that role in the future. So is that okay? Is there any concerns about that designation, that he takes care of that? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question of Ron about another item he talked about, if we're done with that.
Well, I was just gonna ask one question about the notices for the work group, just on that. We typically have noticed those work group meetings either through email or online, is that correct? On the website. Is that sufficient?
Yes, it's subject to the notice under the Open Meetings Act and not any other more stringent notice requirements in the board rules. So the 72-hour notice, which can be on the website, is adequate for the.
And I guess it would require now official minutes of each of those work groups. And then would those work group minutes have to be approved through an act of this committee now that they would be official?
That's not a question that's been asked or answered yet, so I don't know. The Attorney General's website has an Open Meetings Act handbook and a Public Information Act handbook in addition to the training videos. And those handbooks answer a lot of questions like this. I haven't read them, so.
Okay.
But I'd recommend directing those questions to your attorneys and
Okay.
asking them to look into that. Now, I will also say that, the board has, our legal staff has provided some guidance, and if the planning group has other kind of questions regarding this that you think might affect all the planning groups that are, general in nature, you can submit those to us, and we can, see if our legal staff is interested in providing an opinion, and we would share that with all of the planning groups in that case.
Scott?
Diane, well, let me see if Diane had a first question and then I'll
Well,
get to
this
you.
may be about open meetings, so go
It
ahead.
is.
Oh, yes.
It's just a comment.
Yes.
When the legislature passed the rule that said we could post those on our website, one of the issues that a lot of us had was that when we posted things on our website, it wasn't date and time stamped. And we had to go back to our web host and make sure that when we post those notices, that you can tell when and what time those notices were posted to meet that 72-hour requirement.
And how did y'all do that?
We use a specific web host that went through and had to program that, so.
So now it stamps it on there, it
Yes.
says it, okay. All right.
I just didn't know if your information, when it gets put on that website, it's dated and timestamped, so.
Okay, that's a good point. We'll double check on that. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So my question of Ron was, this November 7th Yocum training about financing, that's not just about water project financing, it's about like water quality and city protection of their city wells kind of loans, all of those?
Yeah, any of our loan programs that we have, the Clean Water Revolving Fund loan program.
Okay.
We would also have staff that can speak to that there. Okay, we are about to propose some rule revisions to implement the bills that passed in the last session. We're drafting those now. We anticipate that we will propose those to our board in December. There's right now just the December 7th board meeting is our target. That will begin a public comment process, and it'll be a 30 or so day process. We usually build in a few extra days for holidays, and there'll be some holidays during the 30 days. When those rules get published in the Texas Register, we will communicate to all of the planning group members that they are out there and available for review and for comment. If that's coming up. Generally the process is the board will propose them. They'll be published. There'll be a 30-day comment period. We will have to adopt rules, potentially with revisions in response to comments within 6 months. So we anticipate sometime in the spring, we would be at the adoption phase of the rules that we propose in December. But we'll make it a point to communicate to everybody at every step along the way of this process. So one of the things that you all are going to discuss today are revision requests for the draft population and demand numbers that the board put together. Those are due to board staff by January 12th, 2018. So the process generally is that those will be submitted to the board. Board staff will review them, and then we will make a recommendation to the board, and the board has to adopt them for them to become the official population and demand numbers for the planning cycle. That'll happen in the springtime. So between January 12th and March or April, we'll be working with the numbers and putting together our recommendation. So Brian will make the presentation today, discuss some revision requests that some of the water user groups are asking the planning group to make. And I guess the point I want to drive home is they're due January 12th, and if y'all want to, if y'all don't want to meet again before January 12th, then today is the day. I also might suggest that you build some flexibility into an action item and allow either your executive committee or the consultant, Brian, or the political subdivision, the ability or the authority to make changes to any revision requests based on feedback from board staff. That would be the only purpose of that, and we're asking this or making this suggestion to all of the planning groups is to try to, if there is some sort of snag, something doesn't line up exactly right in your request, we wouldn't want you to have to meet again. We would want somebody to have the ability to maybe make some minor adjustments to the request so that the planning group wouldn't have to come back together to approve something different. So just a suggestion that you may want to consider. So on October 17th, our board held a work session with the planning group chairs. Chair Scott could not attend that, so Tim Andrus attended in her place. The primary purpose of the work session was to discuss implementing the legislative changes from the last legislative session. There's a video of the work session that is posted online. If you're interested and you want to watch the work session, there is some interesting conversation. The topics that were covered were Open Meetings Act and Public Information Act, also simplified planning, feasible and infeasible water management strategies, and how the planning groups may need to deal with a change in the law on addressing infeasible strategies during the planning process, as well as, yeah, those were the primary things. I guess House Bill 2215 also synchronized the DFC process and the planning group process, and so the goal there was to try to get that lined up and make sure that the planning groups had the freshest modeled and available groundwater numbers. So I'd encourage you to watch the work session, the video of it. Are there any questions about any of the stuff that was discussed or what maybe was said? I mean, I will say that in many cases there weren't conclusions drawn, but there was just discussion about these topics, and the purpose of it was to get input that will be used in drafting the rules the rule revisions that I referred to that will be out in early December.
Will it be easy to find on the website?
I can send you a link directly if you'd like, but if you click on the board meetings, which is kind of in the top left part of the front page of the board page, then you'll be able to click on the October 17th work session, and that will take you to an external site, which will have all of the board meetings, and you'll choose the October 17th again.
Thank you. I wouldn't have looked there.
So now, Ron, the feedback or comment period will expire prior to our next meeting.
That's correct.
So anyone that wants to review those rules and make comment will have to do that individually, because we will not have another meeting in time to comment or present any comments as a group to that. So just review it on your own, and if there's something that would, as in our review from the administrator perspective, if Sarah finds anything that is a concern, obviously we'll share that with the group as a whole, but it's really going to be individual responsibility on each entity to do that.
I only have one more thing. It's kind of just a note for you all, because I'm sure a lot of you know Dr. Mace, but Dr. Robert Mace retired from the Water Development Board on October 31st. My understanding is he's taking a position with the Meadows Center starting in December. So we will certainly miss him, and I know a lot of y'all who worked with him at the board will miss him, but he'll still be in the water world. So, are any other questions?
I was going to ask if you were the one that I saw punching out Robert Mace in that photo, but
I did not punch him. There is a photo. I didn't kick him either, but there were others. All right, thanks, y'all.
I think people were a little jealous about retirement at that age.
Yeah, really. Okay. So again, we'll send out something on the public information training, but, if y'all don't have anything to do on the weekend and you're sitting with your computer and have an extra hour, I'd go ahead and get it knocked out when you can, and then just get the certificate and scan it and send it to Cole. Okay? As far as the chair's report goes, just a couple of things. I guess I wanted to ask Mr. Conley. We had received a notice of your resignation as a commissioner to run for judge. And I guess trying to figure out exactly about your position. What I understand is, obviously you don't have to be an elected official to continue to represent the county's needs. But obviously we would need to know from the Commissioner's Court if that's still their desire, is to have you continue to represent them as you're going through this process or not. And if not, then didn't know if you would then resign from the planning group, and then we would have to open up your position for a county. Have you discussed that at all, or?
It is my understanding that my colleagues would like me to continue to serve,
Okay.
but I'll get a letter to you from the judge's office
That would be perfect.
referencing that, and go from there. I just there's a lot of transition, so
Sure.
this was on my list, and I wasn't exactly sure. I don't remember exactly sure how our bylaws were set up.
Yeah, I think we just need something from the county that says that you are still representing the county's interest.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
And we have some precedent for that. I think Mr. Kite was in a situation as well. He used to be an elected official and then wasn't, and still represented the county.
Yes, ma'am.
So, thank you. I'm glad that we'll still have some continuity with you on
Thank you.
the planning group.
Thank you.
And then I also put in the packet, we did receive the notice from the Water Development Board regarding the GBRA request that we had facilitated in our last meeting. And that will be going to the December meeting of the Water Development Board for official action. Is that correct?
Yeah, that,
And it's in your packet, by the way, the report that I received.
yeah, that substitution, along with some other amendments and a new minor aquifer designation will be part of a state water plan amendment on December 7th.
Okay. So, any questions on that? Kevin, did you have any comments on anything on this?
Thank you.
All right. Okay, that is all I had. Again, I wanted to thank Tim for attending the chairs meeting. I really appreciate you being able to go. Thank you so much for that. All right, next is the discussion and appropriate action regarding the meeting schedule for calendar year 2018. You have that in your packet. Following the same kind of quarterly meeting schedule that we've been having. Any questions or comments about the schedule? I could entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, Weldon? Do I have a second? Second? Okay, Glenn? Okay, all those in favor of approving the meeting schedule for calendar year 2018, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. Thank you very much. Okay, next, we have an item that I believe is Saws making the presentation, or is,
Mr. Perkins.
oh, Brian is making the presentation. This is regarding the minor amendment request that Saws is having regarding the conservation issue.
Yeah, I can talk about the solid water management plan, but I'm not
No.
disqualified.
No, this is number 8.
Okay, sorry. I don't actually have anything to present. I have an explanation to talk about, essentially. A couple meetings ago, Mr. Alex Moore on board explained water management strategies and water management strategy projects, and kind of the differences between those two. Water management strategies being projects that either create or save water in the plan. Water management strategy projects are the infrastructure that goes with those strategies. During the 2016 planning cycle, San Antonio Water System had a water conservation, was included in the advanced water conservation strategy, just like every municipal one we have. But they also had, as part of that strategy for them, they had a sub-strategy that was advanced meter infrastructure. In the plan that is, in the written plan that's documented, it has all the information there, including potential savings of water and infrastructure and money that's associated with that to accomplish that. Somehow in the database, that did not get entered as a water management strategy project. Their overall advanced water conservation goals are in there as a water management strategy. It's just that the funding part of this, the finance part of this, did not get entered as a project. It was really our first opportunity in many planning cycles, or all the planning cycles actually, that we had specific funds attached to infrastructure that went towards water conservation. And from what I understand, this is not a mistake that only Region L made. I think it's a mistake that several other regions have had. What SAWS is seeking is an amendment to simply add what's already documented in the written plan to the database as a water management strategy project, so that they may seek SWIFT funding for that infrastructure part of their water conservation. And Mr. Ellis, please tell me if I'm speaking out of turn, but I think that's the story.
No, that's accurate.
Okay, and what happens is, because it has a financial component to it and it rolls up to the state water plan, we have to go through what we believe are minor amendments to do that. It's not substitution. We're not substituting something from a alternative strategy to a recommended strategy. The recommended strategy just didn't get documented in the database properly. We just need to make that adjustment. Honestly, from a regional planning group standpoint and from a consultant standpoint, assuming you move forward with this request over this meeting, the next meeting, there's nothing we have to do other than request this and get it granted. They already have all the information. There's no additional information that has to be created, documented, whatnot. It's just simple, allows the water on board to take what's in the written plan and put it into the database properly.
So
have any
this would
questions?
be, similar to what we did before, we would be seeking a request of the Water Development Board to determine that this constitutes a minor
That's correct.
amendment.
Yeah.
And then would we, at our next meeting, would have to have a public meeting on that request? Is that correct?
And I think,
Depending on your response, I guess. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so the item before you would be to approve a request for a determination, minor and major amendment. So that would come to the board would make a determination and give you a response, plenty of time for your next meeting. And at the next meeting, that would require 2-week notice in advance, or I think it's 14 days. Notice in advance before the meeting and a 14-day comment period after the meeting. But I don't know that we even call it a public hearing, it's just an additional notice and comments after the fact. That, assuming the planning group approves that amendment at that meeting, then that would come back to the board and it would be incorporated again into a state water plan amendment. So that this water management strategy project with associated capital costs would be in the regional water plan and in the state water plan, and it would be eligible for the SWIFT program, among other loan programs.
And I understood that there was some type of, y'all made an exception for these kinds of things to allow for these projects to be eligible for funding if we got all this done by the May timeframe. Is that, am I understanding that correct?
Essentially, it's too late to get a new project into, to make an amendment to get a new project, or to make an amendment to the regional or state water plan to be SWIFT eligible in this upcoming cycle. However, in previous cycles and in this cycle we will as well, the board will process this type of amendment, which is limited to adding capital costs to an existing strategy, concurrent with the SWIFT process to be eligible for that cycle.
Okay.
It has to be complete before commitments are made, which is typically in a normal cycle in July.
Okay.
So this is, Brian said this is something that has happened in other regions as well. There's been at least one other amendment done in another region to address this. And it's something that we are cognizant of in terms of going forward, trying to make sure that all of the planning groups and their consultants are aware of exactly what it needs to look like in the regional and state water plan in order to be eligible. So there's a exhibit D to the contracts, and the next contract amendment will have a revised version. And that exhibit is basically tells the planning groups exactly how the database work needs to be done for everything, and it will include a much more explanation and detail about this, so that we can help the planning groups keep this from happening.
and I'll just follow, as just one thing I forgot to mention, as Saul's advanced meter infrastructure was a subset of the recommended water management strategy that was water conservation. I'm convinced that it was the intent of the planning group for that to be part of their plan going anyway. This was just simply a thing that didn't get updated in the database properly.
So does anybody have any questions about what's in front of you here? Or have any questions of SAW regarding the project or anything?
What was the cost of the project?
Well, it's not in existence yet, it's what we proposed.
What?
But it would be probably about 125 million.
I think.
Yeah, the letter indicates 122.6 million.
And those are documented in regional plan, it was with the water management strategy, which is in volume 2.
Okay, any other questions?
We made a motion.
Yes, we will need a motion. Would
So
someone-
moved. The motion is going to ask staff to, or Regional to ask of the Water Development Board
Yes.
whether or not this would qualify as a excuse me, an amendment or a minor amendment.
Yes.
And then, we'll take action on it then at the next quarterly meeting.
Yes. It would be back on the agenda at the next meeting in February.
That's my motion.
Okay? All right. So Gary and then Kevin. All right. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. All right. Great. That is approved. Thank you. All right. Next is the presentation by SAW on the water management plan. And you do have these slides in your materials.
Okay, all right, good morning, everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Donovan Burton, Vice President of Water Resources and Government Relations for San Antonio Water System. We have, much like this process, a bottom-up process where we saw us develop a water management plan, which we then feed into this process, the Region L process. Obviously, as we all do, we all have to plan for a lot of different variables, but number one coming up that we see as a driver is population. Obviously, population is a huge driver within Texas. Many cities actually, in fact, we're the fastest growing city in Texas. There are a number of cities that can claim being the fastest growing by percentage, by population, all sorts of different fastest growing, but certainly, San Antonio is one of the fastest growing and the fastest growing city by population in Texas, which means we have to develop new supplies and new water management efforts to make sure that we have water for our population, just like everyone else does. 80% increase that we see by 2070, and 800,000 more people by 2040 alone. So a big freight train coming down that we have to make sure that we have enough water to sustain our future. Everyone, again, throughout Texas has seen these kinds of headlines. We're all tackling how to bring water for 1 million more people. We can't ignore it. Economic development and population growth can be a very good thing. It just has to be managed in the right way. It obviously requires some more development of infrastructure, including water, roads, education, all those sorts of things. And so that's what we're doing, certainly at SAWS and throughout. As another big driver as well is we get to plan through the political, regulatory, and legal processes. We have a lot of stakeholders within the process of water development. Obviously, everyone in this room, and it goes far, far beyond this room to the state government, federal government, and beyond. So a lot of different stakeholders in a water management plan. We want to make sure that this doesn't become us, and I'm sure that's what every water supply entity wants to make sure, that growth doesn't run over their water supply efforts. And so this is an actual cartoon ran many, many years ago within San Antonio. We are definitely not in this place, but this is what we want to try to avoid. It's not enough just to plan. I know this body has talked a lot about planning for projects, and sometimes you plan for more projects. We have certainly had our share of planning for projects that didn't work out. And so we're wanting to, and that's what we think is different about this particular water management plan. So these are just, again, some specific plans that were projects that we had planned for that ultimately ended up in zero yield. We have to make sure not only that we plan, but we implement the plan. Like I said, what we think is different about this one is our projects are actually in the ground, being built, or actually already working. I'll get into that a little bit more. Again, just like this body, we plan on a 5-year basis, and we plan based off of a drought of record. This year, we have a little bit of a different drought of record planning. We also saw a more intense drought from 2011 to 2014-15 time frame. And so we have hybridized the drought of record model to make it even more conservative. Not to make it more conservative, we think that we are seeing more intense droughts, and we think that's going to continue into the future. So not only are we planning for the duration of the 1950s drought, but we think more intense droughts will be the rule, not the exception. Obviously, planning variables, population demand, firm yield, We have to have the water, just because there's water on paper doesn't mean the water is actually there during drought, and so we have to make sure that is planned for. And then timing of supplies. We have to make sure these projects are not, you can't just pull them off the shelf. They are 10, 20 years in the making, and so we have to make sure that the timing of these supplies works out. So some of our guiding principles of this plan, of this recent water management plan that our board just approved, are conservation, diversifying our water supplies, technology, and regional partnerships. We have to make sure we leverage some of the regional partnerships. We talk about all the time, conservation is not only a green feel-good thing for SAWS, it is a business model, and we are absolutely committed to conservation as a business model. You've seen the slide that we've had almost a 50% reduction just over the last 3 decades in our gallons per capita per day. What that leads to is less money, less investment that we have to do. We would have had, had we not had that savings, we would have had to have 4 new other Vista Ridge projects online. Our rates would be extremely high at this point. We'd be drawing a whole lot more water. And so conservation is good by saving money and saving projects that we don't have to do. We would have needed 215,000 acre feet more than we do today had we not had conservation in place. That also saves on the back end at the wastewater side. I'm going to work on that delivery of that joke. So we save on the wastewater side. The water that we don't bring in, we don't have to treat at the wastewater treatment plant and expand your treatment plants and have more. And so that is that's a savings as well. So both of those together are billions and billions of dollars that you save by conservation. In this water management plan, we're continuing that. We project at least a 30% drop in our GPCD out into the 2070 timeframe. We're already, our city had a Say Tomorrow plan. They had a goal of 110 by 2040. We're already well ahead of that, we think. And so making good progress, and again, always committed to conservation. We also, that leads into extreme weather conditions. We think, I talked about the intensity of the drought. Everyone has heard the joke about we get 30 inches of rain a year. You should be here that weekend that we get it. We have lots of flashy rains. We all have to plan for long droughts and rains at the same time. Those are both important things that you have to plan for. We think through this water management plan, it shows that SAWS is well positioned to address some of those extreme changes through both groundwater sources, conservation, our ASR project that we heard about before, and diversification. Technology is another big component to what our future water management is. We think that by putting tools in the hands of our customers, it gets them more involved in water conservation. It helps us and it helps them conserve water. And we think that's a very important thing. So we talked just now about our automated metering process that we're working through. We're establishing a smartphone app that I think many people are going to. We have an infrastructure assessment tool that we're going in. You don't just replace water mains based on age. You have to base it based off of condition, and so that's what we're assessing some of the water infrastructure. That helps us with non-revenue water and water loss. Like I said, personalized customer reports, data analysis, those all feed into our non-revenue water tools. Regional partnerships, again, and as everyone in this room will attest to, San Antonio is not just San Antonio. What happens in San Antonio impacts the entire region. What happens in communities outside of San Antonio impacts San Antonio. So we are all a big region, but everything that one individual entity does impacts everyone else in it. And so through our water management plan, we are obviously commitment to the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan that everyone in this room knows a lot about. It is a fundamental tenet going forward. Local management of groundwater. Obviously, we have a lot of our projects are from, obviously the Vista Ridge project is 140 miles away. We've got a Gonzales project 70 miles away, and other ones right out next to us. And so we have to make sure that we are planning for local management of groundwater and partnering with those groundwater districts as we go forward. Protecting our in-stream flows through our Bed and Banks project. I think you've gotten a briefing on Bed and Banks. But again, the water that we use in San Antonio impacts all the way down to the bays and estuaries and all those communities here and between. And then regional water sharing opportunities. We've had a lot of success with this in the past, working on deals to share infrastructure with people, saving us millions of dollars and saving them as well. I think there are other regional water sharing opportunities that we have in San Antonio that we've planned for. The Vista Ridge project obviously gives us a little bit of flexibility to wholesale water along that pipeline and other places. And I think we've talked to a lot of people in this room and elsewhere, and I think this opportunity exists with really everyone in this room. We think there are a lot of different water sharing opportunities available. This slide is about our water supply, and this one, I think, again, goes to why this plan is so much different than the last plan. We expect that Vista Ridge will come online in 2020, and why that's different, again, is that there's pipe going in the ground. If anybody drives up the 130 corridor, you'll see a lot of construction, a lot of pipe laying. Again, this is just one photo of pipe stretched out all over one road. So it is an actual project that is going in the ground now, and it is going to happen by 2020. And then our brackish groundwater desalination plant and our local Carrizo expansion, we've got into the 2040 timeframe, depending on how water plays out. But those, again, the brackish desalination plant is up and running. All we have to do is plug in more trains and make it expand it. And the same with the local Carrizo project. It is up and running. All we have to do is expand it. So these are real projects, and it's a real water management plan, I guess. The diversification, again, we have now 15 different water projects from 8 different sources. Lots of different diversification. Vista Ridge will bring one more on, 16 different water projects. And so diversification is critical for a number of reasons. We can see really it's diversifying off of the Edwards water. In an average year, in 2017, we have about 60% of our supply comes from Edwards. If you look just a few years before this, a lot of that diversification hadn't happened. So a lot of the diversification has already happened over the last several years, and we'll continue that diversification out through our water management plan. In a drought year, it's even more stark. Right now, we're about 42% Edwards Aquifer based, and really goes down to 31% based off the Edwards Aquifer in 2070. And so it's a very big commitment to diversification. It allows us to do what we've called the ABCs of SAWS that we've talked about before, our Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project, that is the largest groundwater based in the country, our state-of-the-art desalination plant, which we're building that can be the largest in the nation, conservation programs, and our largest direct recycle system. One of the fundamental pieces of this plan was community input. We got a lot of community input both on the positive side and on the opposition side. We got several people who said it's clear, it demonstrates a strong commitment, and we believe SAWS will deliver. Jaw-dropping GPCD goals, I think that was a big comment, and I think most people agreed that it was a big improvement over the previous plan. And so we have a lot of different plan, appreciative that the plan provides firm water. And so a lot of good comments, but we also, I'm sorry, yes sir? Oh, gallons per capita per day, your consumption, personal consumption of customers. We also got comments that we made changes to the plan. So the comments were not just comments that we received and dismissed. We added new sections about risk mitigation. What are you going to do if this happens to that project? And we put something in about risk mitigation of different projects. A lot of people wanted more data, so we added a bunch of appendices to make sure that everybody understood all of the assumptions and the data associated with it. We expanded the conservation and demand management piece of it, and so we have a lot more in there about conservation that a lot of people wanted to see. So the summary of the plan is that we, from a supply perspective, Vista Ridge is coming on in 2020, and we'll bring on additional phases of desal and Carrizo into the 2050s. We expect our GPCD to go down to 88 GPCD. Right now we're at about 117, and 55 GPCD on the residential side. Non-revenue will bring that down to at least 14%. We think hopefully even more than that. Again, population projections we talked about, we have a lot of new population, but our demand, you'll see, is actually going down by substantial, by 30% reduction. So this brings us out to 2070, this water management plan. This graph is just really the outputs of what we see as we plug in all of the variables into our model. The lines across the center are the demand lines, the bars are the supplies, and we look for gaps, and wherever we see a gap, we fill it. We've got plenty of supply to last us out to 2070 and beyond. So we're committed to a water management plan that obviously we're filtering up through this process. Again, committed to conservation. It's a fundamental tenet of our project, of our plan. Diversifying our water supplies, committed to regional responsibility and partnerships. Technology is a huge step going forward, and we think it gives us water security for decades. So that's the thumbnail sketch. I don't know how I did on time, but try to run through it. I'll answer any questions if there's any time left.
Okay, questions? Greg?
Nice question. I saw one, you said that 2020, the Vista Ridge project, and you'll be pumping 50,000. You think you'll be pumping total 50,000 from the beginning?
Yes, they expect to be pumping the full amount, and now the 50,000 is based on a full year. The project will probably come in April, so it'll be less than 50 in the first year, but that's just for a time perspective. But it'll be 45 MGD, and it will be full speed. And the wells, they're testing their wells now. They're drilling a few of the wells and testing them, and it's showing that they're very productive, and it's exactly what they expect.
Yes, sir.
Donovan, out of the 50,000 acre feet, what is under contract for long-term and what is under contract for short-term?
The 50,000 for Vista Ridge, it's under contract starting in 2020. And so we have the full allotment of 50,000 starting in 2020. That goes through a contract through 2050 for 30 years with the private sector. And then all of it transfers to SAWS. So SAWS gets all of the assets, and there's a continuing contract with the water providers, Blue Water, for an additional 30 years. And so the project, we're committed to it for a full 60 years and beyond.
Thanks.
Yes.
Well, I'm curious about his question about short and long term, and your answer was about the contract. What happens if there is an unforeseen drawdown that goes beyond what is anticipated right now in the counties that the water comes from? And how long are those groundwater permits for?
Yeah, okay, so a few different questions in there, and this is exactly the question that came up and why, in the public comment, why we added the risk mitigation section. What happens if that happens? It will, and that's our piece about, we want to make sure that we're planning for local management of the water. What we've agreed to is with the private sector that they have taken that risk. And so if the drawdown is more significant than was expected, and if the groundwater district at that point decides that they want to draw that down, SAWS is only having to pay for water that we're receiving. And so, or made available. If they're making water available, we pay for it up to 50,000 acre feet. But they have taken the risk that said if the groundwater district cuts them back for whatever those sorts of reasons are, SAWS doesn't have to pay for that water. And that's what I mentioned, we have the flexibility at that point. If we don't have enough water, that gives us a risk of not having enough water. That allows us to bring on the brackish desalination plant or the local Carrizo project earlier at that time, should it be necessary.
And if you contract with other cities to give them some of that Vista Ridge water, will there be a way for you to say, we may not have this?
Yeah, I think that would be part of it. We would have to work that out with the entities, and and should that happen, the groundwater, the supply risk is the same with those groundwater districts. And so we would have to work that out through a contract with those entities to understand how much of a cutback. Are they taking a proportional share? Is it a smaller amount to where we can absorb it? So I think a lot of those details will be worked out, but that's definitely something that we have to work out with those entities.
And can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Regarding the non-revenue water, I'm familiar with non-revenue water after everything we've been through in San Marcos to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I know it's not all leaks, but if you were to look at it as leaks or water loss, then I was trying to come up with a number. And so gallons or a acre feet.
Mhm.
And so I looked at your total demand projection of 324,000 acre feet per year in 2070. And I calculated that, I think if I did this right, it's about 48,000 acre feet that you're calling non-revenue water that I guess you're gonna save. That's how you're looking at it.
From a 2070 perspective?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, and so what our plan is to get down to about 14% over the next really 5 to 7, maybe 10 years. Certainly get it within there. And then we won't stop there. It's not, that won't be the end of non-revenue water driving down, but we have to set an achievable goal that we believe we can reach. And so we think we're going to get.
14% would be by 2020.
Yes, well, by about 2025, I think is a more realistic expectation.
I may be really getting out into the weeds here, but all this diversification reminded me that years ago, the Edwards Aquifer was designated a sole source aquifer. Is that term way out of date now, no longer used, or insignificant? Do you know any background information on that?
I guess I'd approach it, it's probably more of a question for Roland, but for us, I think at one point it was our sole source aquifer, and so I think a lot of the legislative efforts back in that time, when they tried to carve out something for the San Antonio area or from one of the other communities, they would say sole source, a community based off of a sole source. So for us, yes, that would not be
No longer applicable?
no longer applicable.
It still might be for some communities or water systems?
It might be,
perhaps.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I would think being half of the aquifer, half of the water demand of such a huge city would be still extremely critical as an aquifer.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Donovan. All right, next is the discussion on the status of the draft population and demand projections. And I believe you have a PowerPoint
Yes.
presentation that has been passed out.
Yeah, it was not part of the original packet, and I'll explain why. And in fact, what was passed out this morning is already out today, so. So, if y'all recall, over the last, well, I guess we got the draft projections from Water on Board in late December of last year, so almost a year now. We spent some time reviewing those draft water demand projections and population projections. Now that's for the municipal side. The mining, the non-municipal, like mining, agriculture, industrial, et cetera, we got those in June of this year, and we reviewed those as well. Any such. As part of the municipal and municipal population and water demand projections, we did a survey, and we solicited information back in April, May timeframe of this year, just to find out how the draft projections provided by the Water and Water Board matched up with local entities and how they matched up with what they were planning for. We got several responses back, and over the course of the summer and early part of the fall, we've been working with those entities to try to get the proper numbers they would like to see into the regional water plan and their justification for that information. So This presentation really summarizes the information we received to date, and what we're looking for in all of this is discussion, obviously, and then an action by the planning group to allow either the entirety of this or some subset of this to be carried forward by Sanitary Authority and Technical Consultant Black Beach to the Water Development Board to request revision change to those draft population water demand and/or water demand projections based on the information provided by the various water user groups and wholesale water providers. Mr. Ellis talked about this earlier. Those are due January 12th of next year. We would solicit a package of here's the changes we're requesting. They would review those changes and they would come back with a wholehearted denial, a wholehearted acceptance, or something in between, which they've done in the past. So I would anticipate we'd have that answer probably not by the February meeting, but we definitely have an answer by the May meeting. So we'd have our water demand projections nailed down by May of next year for sure. We may have some indication by the February meeting. So I would like to run through the entities that we received information for and I've been working with over the last 6 months or so to gather that information and not only what they wish, but again, that justification of what we would present to the Water Development Board as their case for this revision request. So these are just in alphabetical order. So County Line was one of them. They had population water main projections. And let me stop. Every single slide you see is pretty much the same thing. The draft water demand projections and population projections by the Water Development Board are presented in the blue table at the top. And the GPCD associated with that, the gallons per capita per day, and that's simply just taking the water divided by the number of people and doing the conversion from acre feet to gallons. And then down the second table in green, you have what the utility or wholesale water provider has requested. And then the justification typically is if they provided a memo or a report. I'll just mention that. If they had some conversation with us or an email that had a couple bullet points, you'll see information about that. So I just want to kind of set the stage for what you'll be seeing over the next 10 slides or so. Anyway, so County Line had projections there that started, population starting around 8,000 people by 2020, growing to 24,000 by 2070. Water demand about 550 acre feet per year in 2020, growing over 1,600 acre feet per year. They're seeking to increase that by about 10,000 people by 2070, up to 34,500 by 2070 in terms of number of people. And then looking at an additional 2,000 acre feet of water of demand by 2070 as well. But and you can see that if you calculate the GPCDs, they're a little bit different. And the justification for this is they provided a memo from their engineer, Southwest Engineers. We can take these one at a time. I can present them all. We can talk about them after. I don't know the best way to.
I would go through all of them.
Okay, let's go through all of them.
People can ask questions. That way we kind of get a sense of
Yeah.
it all.
Please stop me and ask questions if you have any. So, that's right. East Central subs. I'll tell you right now, everything you see in your paper is out of date. I just got an email this morning. They changed the numbers a little bit on me. And they provided their justification, which they hadn't had before. So, initially, when I was discussing with them, let's talk about it. They had their draft populations from the Water Board, starting around about 14,400 people in 2020, growing to about almost 23,000 by 2070. Water demand of 2,000 acre feet, growing almost to 3,000 acre feet by 2070. My initial discussions with them, they provided information for the decades of 2020 and 2030 only, revised population and water demand based on that. I then corresponded back to them, talking about, this does have a ripple effect in the subsequent decades. If so, consider potential numbers. We've gone back and forth a couple of times. As of this morning, their revision request, what you see for 2020 remains the same, but slight changes in every decade going forward. I'll just jump to the end. By 2070, they're requesting a population of 23,572. which is slightly greater. And water demand then of 3,327 acre-feet per year. And their justification they provided this morning was that active connections at three people per connection for the decade of 2020, and then following the same growth curve that the Water Development Board had for subsequent decades. So growth in population, growth in water demand, same growth pattern. So that's their information to me. So, okay. Garden Ridge. Garden Ridge has had population and water demand projections from the board, 4,700 people in 2020, up to about 13,000 by 2070. Water demand, almost 1,700 acre-feet, growing to about almost 4,600 by 2070. Garden Ridge, I believe, is somewhat landlocked in terms of what's growing around them. Their opportunity for expansion is probably not as big as, they don't feel as big as the Water Development Board does, and so they're actually requesting lower population and water demand. To the tune of about 3,300 less people by 2070 and about 1,200 acre-feet of less in demand by 2070. And they provided a memo again from their city engineer, actually, an internal memo from the city. Go Forth Special Utility District. This is a interesting one because it splits between Regions L and Regions K. If you look at just go Forth combined, Region K and Region L together, the draft population projections from the Water Board, roughly about 17,000 people growing to 57,000 people. If you're not familiar with Go Forth, it sits primarily east of 35, south of Austin, kind of in that near Buda area. Sunfield Mud is in that area as well. And there's a lot of houses are starting to go in that area. So they are experiencing a lot of growth, down that kind of between that I-35 corridor and SH-130 corridor. I think the state highway 45 toll road is right in that area as well. Their water demand from the Water Development Board, almost about 1,857 acre-feet in 2020, growing almost to 6,000 acre-feet by 2070. That's combined Regions L and Region K. They primarily exist in Region L. So the numbers you see here, 95% of that is in Region L. I've been working with the Region K consultant to make sure we were apples to apples and we had everything going. But they provided another memo as well, showing that they believe they're going to grow much larger than what the Water Development Board has. To the tune of 36,000 additional people than what the Water Development Board felt, up to 93,000 people by 2070. An additional 5,000 acre-feet of water demand by 2070. There was some concern when we discussed this in the staff work group whether, as part of this process, we have to make adjustments in population. If we add people to one area, we need to take out another. So there were some concerns there of whether the county other category, which is most likely to be affected with the Balancing Act, could support this. And I'm looking at the three counties that they reside in. They reside in Caldwell, Hayes in Region L, but then also Travis, I believe, in Region K. There's enough there. There's enough people in the county other categories that could be shifted around to meet this request. Although it's a big request. So. Green Valley Stud. I'm still working with them on some additional information. They did provide information for at least current year 2017. I have sent them some suggested projections based on the 2017 numbers going out. Essentially, I took their 2017 numbers and just kind of looked at what they had and some growth projections they had given me, and kind of determined some numbers for 2020, looking 3 years out, and then subsequent decades every 10 years out. From that, I don't believe I've heard back from them at this point. I'm still working with them, trying to get what exactly they'd like out of this. They have Tri-Hydro as their engineers, formerly River City Engineering. Thank you. And I will be working with them to try to nail that down here in the subsequent week or two. And I think this gets into what Mr. Ellis was talking about, maybe having some leeway and designating the executive committee of the planning group with a little bit of leeway to allow for these changes to still happen before our January 12th deadline. Oops. Kendall West Utilities. Kendall West Utilities exists in Kendall County, north of Bear County, up to 281 corridor. It's relatively new, I guess, utility. It's growing rapidly as that 281 corridor grows. Population and water demand projections from the board. Population 2,500 by 2020, growing to about 5,600 by 2070. Water demand 300 acre feet, growing to about almost 700 or 650 acre feet by 2070. And talking to them, they're a developer, really, and they do have a utility, but a lot of that's still run by the developer. And so I've struggled to try to get realistic numbers out of them. And I say realistic, not in the sense of that they're wrong, but they would give me population numbers and water demand numbers that when you did the math and got to the GPCD, it would be astronomically large. And so I, kind of educate them on gallons per capita per day, and how, a 600 gallons per capita day was probably unreasonable for this area. So, but anyway, we've provided some additional, they provided some additional information and revisions. I think these are, in terms of at least the numbers working out to something reasonable, these numbers seem that way. Whether the population growth and water demand would be in that area is up to, I guess, how well they develop the area. But they're asking for roughly no changes early on, but then growing to 18,000 people by 2070 and over 2,200 acre feet of water by 2070. And that's an increase of over 12,000 people and 1,500 acre feet of water than what the board projects. And you can see some of their justifications. Again, this is several emails back and forth, some bullet points that they provided. Next one, Martindale Water Supply Corporation. Again, Martindale, if I remember, Mr. Taggart probably remember, they are east of 35 near the San Marcos area, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Just remember trying to remember my geography. Also experiencing some growth in the area. Water demand population projections start around 3,000 people by 2020, growing to 6,400 by 2070. Water demand 326 in 2020 by over 600 by 2070. They have sent in requests to start out a little slower, but then grow. I'm sorry, no, by 2020. Sorry, 2020. They provided information on 2007, 2010, but then starting with the 2020 projection, they're looking at 3,900 people, growing to 27, over 15,000 people, which is about 9,000 more than what the Water and Health Board had projected them. Water demands, again in 2020, being 440 acre feet, growing to over 1,700 acre feet by 2070. Again, several emails and some justification listed here. They engaged their engineer right away. Martindale did, and so we're reporting back and forth with their engineer. Okay. San Antonio Water System, I don't know if you've heard of them. But anyway, they are working with the Water and Health Board, Black Beach, and others to try to get something realistic that represents what's in their 2017 water management plan that you just saw. In doing so, the request is, and it's something that based on our conversations with the Water and Health Board and conference calls we've had, it sounds like it should be acceptable by Texas Water and Health Board, is that they will request essentially no change in population projections, but will set a GPCD and thus water demand that is more akin to the 2012 year baseline rather than the 2011 baseline, and looking at the utility as a whole instead of just the municipality of San Antonio, as was done in the 2016 plan. And so in doing so, they end up with a water demand that's by 2020 about almost 240,000 acre feet, growing to a little bit over 350,000 acre feet by 2070. if you look at that water demand versus the 2017 water management plan of Saul's, those don't match up. But with these numbers in there and the addition of advanced water conservation and drought management, Saul's staff at this point feels that the water demand, the end wet water demand that we'll end up with for Saul's will be close or akin to what they have in their 2017 water management plan. And this also allows a mechanism for them to get funding for water conservation going forward. And that's sort of complicated. If anyone has any questions, I can answer it, or Mr. Seaver, or Mr. Thompson, who's been involved in all this. Okay. San Marcos. San Marcos Water and Board population projections start around 75,000 people, growing up to 181,000 people by 2070. Water demand 12,590, going up to almost a little over 29,000 by 2070. They have requested a revision that is less, actually, by 2070. About 171,000 was based on their current projections, and that's looking at the 2010 survey and historical comprehensive growth rate of 1.78% per year, I believe. And GPCD projections are based on historical information. That also gets you to a little bit less water, too, a little under 20,000 acre feet of water by 2070. So this is the information they'd like to carry forward to the water board. We're almost done, I promise. 3 more to go. Springs Hill Water Supply Corporation. Been working with Gene Schneider on this. Population projection from the Water and Board projections, 22,000 people by 2020, growing up to almost 45,000 people by 2070. A water demand of 1902 acre feet by 20.
You picked up my water demand, you didn't pick up the population measure.
You gave me the population?
I assure you,
I'm
we're
sorry.
already at 22,000.
Okay. So I need to revise that. Apparently I missed putting that in there. Thank you. So populations will change. Water demand, looking at 3,200 acre feet of water by 2020, growing up to closer to 6,500. Springs Hill is experiencing some growth around the I-10 corridor and also 46 going up to New Braunfels, in which case actually New Braunfels is probably the utility for that, but as development comes in, the developers have to bring their own water, and they're most likely to turn to Spring Hill for that water. Is that accurate?
All I can say is I think you have every manufacturing company in the world has moved to Seguin, and they've just hit 18 months of being there. Therefore, these people are out buying houses, and there's no room for growth in the city.
Yeah.
So we are experiencing enormous growth right now.
The city itself is kind of landlocked by Springs Hill and Crystal Clear on the northern side of the county. So I will get the population changes in there.
You've got to work on it.
I probably misunderstood you. SS Water Supply Corporation, located in Wilson County. 16,000 people. Water and Board projection, 16,000 people by 2020, growing up to over 33,000 by 2070. Water demand, 2,000 acre feet, growing up to about 3,800 acre feet, or a little over 3,800 acre feet by 2070. Their requests, they show the current population around 13.8. So if they project that forward, they're looking at closer to 18,000 by 2020, growing up to 62,000 by 2070. Water demand-wise, 2,200 by 2020, growing up to 7,200 by 2070. This is relatively significant change in population here. This is one of the checks I made also looking at Wilson County. Is there enough in County Other to cover that? My fear is that there's not. So we have to make adjustments to other counties as well, potentially. And I know they're situated in an area with a lot of folks who may move to either Bexar County or Wilson County or other surrounding counties. So we might have to suggest, if we were to go forward with this, we may have to adjust not only Wilson County, but some other counties as well. We couldn't necessarily do it all in the county. And they provided a population study by H2 Analytics from April 2013. And then finally, Yoakum is seeking a change in request to their draft populations. Essentially, all they're looking at is going from they're sticking with 2011 as their base year, but they want to be judged on municipal boundaries of Yoakum, but the utility boundaries. And if you look at that, it drops their GPCD from 169 to 168. I bring this up because again, this is a utility that straddles regions L and region P in this case, and that request was made at region P. And in order for region P to take it forward to the water board is going to want to make sure that region L is consistent with that as well. So whether we take it forward or not, it's going forward at least through the region P process. We can either endorse it or just be mum on it and let the water board make their decision. That's all I have. Discussion, questions?
Okay, any questions on any of this?
Suzanne,
Yes.
on the balancing act, Brian, that you described, I guess I'm wondering exactly how that works. You know, as we see increases as presented, and you mentioned decreases, where do the decreases show up?
Thank you. Actually, I had to start here. I was going to talk about this subject. So in past plans, and most likely in this plan, the state feels really great about the projections from the state standpoint. They feel really good about the projections on a region-wide projection. You get down to the county level, they're fairly accurate. They're pretty, 85, 90% of the time they're pretty accurate. You get down to the individual utility level, and they understand that they may make projection problems, and so that's why we have this revision request problem. So as we ask for either increases or decreases by utility that they've requested, we need to kind of consider that balancing act. And so as part of this action today, we'll be seeking not only to make these changes, but the necessary changes to other areas to create that balance. That balance generally happens in the county other category, because if you recall, the county other category is basically everyone else in a county that serves municipal water but doesn't quite meet that threshold to be a designated water user group. And so we are only looking at those that have this certain threshold or that or greater that meet the threshold to be that water user group. But everybody else kind of gets lumped in. That can be something as small as a trailer park with a single well. It can be a utility that serves, I can't remember 100 acre feet?
100 acre feet.
Yeah, so they could serve 95 acre feet, and they could be lumped in the county other.
Brian, do exempt well users fall under that category as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, we do have a domestic livestock category that covers some of the, like a single ranch, right? No?
Well, there's a livestock, non-municipal category, but it's.
You're right, never mind. Yes, it falls under county other. Never mind. I'm getting my terms confused. You're right.
Thank you.
It's livestock.
Any other questions?
Well, I guess my question would be, in looking at all that these cities have generally asked for, which I realize aren't all increases, but a lot of them are, the smaller ones anyway. They're adding on to their cities, right, and their service lines, or they're expanding.
Right.
And so that makes sense that you would take them out of the county numbers, because the county would be serving fewer if the cities were expanding. Can you do that in a county where, say, San Antonio water system would be located, Bear County? Are you gonna be able to take what was the water demand for that county and put it on the county instead of the city if the city's is reduced? That's a big reduction.
I'm sorry. Typically, the balancing act we're trying to do is population, because what gets put in the water demand is not only the population, but also the assumed gallons per capita per day, and at what rate that's declining because of passive plumbing fixture changes or new plumbing fixtures going in. So the balancing act is not on the water demand side, it's really on the population. And so to the extent that any county, whether it's Bear County or Goliad County, I'm not picking on Goliad County necessarily, but has not been fully part of a municipality, there is a county other category. And that population could be served by a single well, domestic well, could be a trailer park with, 13 units and a well or something. Or it could be incorporated into one or multiple cities down the road.
Any other questions? Okay, so the action that we need today is to authorize the consultant to go forward in finalizing these revisions to submit to the Water Development Board, but allowing some flexibility within this development period, particularly if you were to get comments back in the initial review from the Water Development Board asking for some clarifications or modifications. Is that correct?
I think what we're seeking is the sanitary regulatory and Blackwood to work together to carry these predictions forward to the board, make the necessary adjustments that balance out on the population side to other groups, primarily county other categories, fix the population in one and get some additional information from another.
Right.
Still. And then, once we start getting comments back from the board, make any necessary adjustments there as well. And then we will report back, anything we find out by February meeting, I'll certainly report back, and we'll definitely have a final presentation by May of next year.
So I guess what we would be doing by this action is we would be limiting that conversation to the entities that are listed in this PowerPoint presentation.
I believe so.
Adding no new entities, someone coming in after the fact, after this action. So any of your moving back and forth or finalizing would be within these entities that are listed here.
Yeah.
If you were to add an entity,
we would come back.
we'd have to come back for a different action. But at least with these entities, your work would be restricted to these
That's correct.
entities. Is that fair?
That's correct. And so anything outside of these utilities, we wouldn't do anything by January 12th. We'd have it, if someone was to pop up December 2nd, say they need something, we would bring it to the planning group on February, and we just have to ask the board to consider additional changes after the February meeting. And the board may say no, but
All right.
we can try.
So does everybody understand the action that's on the table?
I would move to that effect.
All right, Diane's made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Tom is second. All those in favor of the motion on the table, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. Thank
And
you.
if we adjust to anything besides county other, you would let us know, right? In February, whatever.
Okay. I'm going to push forward here real quick. Let's move to item number 11. Okay, so the next few items are sort of recapping some of the work that we've been working on regarding the guiding principles for the 2021 plan. So under item number 11 is kind of a list, as Cole does every time we meet, to just sort of give you a running allocation of our work to date and kind of where we are with the various items that we were tasked with reviewing. So that's item number 11. Any questions on that? Through the items that are in front of us today at this meeting, we should complete, depending on the actions again of the planning group here today, we should complete the task that's listed here, all of the items that have come forward and came forward as part of this plan enhancement process. So what we would be, again, depending on the actions here today, then what we would do, since all of these would have been acted on according to the process that we've put forward, then what we would do when we come either during the interim between now and February, we would combine all of these into one document and then send that back out to everybody saying, okay, these are the approved guiding principles for our group going forward for 2021. So just keep that in mind. But again, if y'all want to make modifications or anything today, obviously this is the time to do that as it relates to the ones that are in front of us now. Any questions about the process? In other words, we're not going to bring this whole thing back again for one other action. We've taken the actions each time. We're not bringing it back for another action, okay? All right, so the first one in front of us is the adoption of the environmental assessment work group recommendations. Stephen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a refresher, the planning group, y'all created an environmental assessment work group in February. We met several times, we met 3 times. I was here in August and I presented on the findings and the recommendations of the environmental assessment work group. Those recommendations were adopted by the planning group, but you all asked me to come back with language in a guiding principle form that can be included in the package on this page. There's nothing new here. What I started with is the language the planning group previously adopted with that we're meeting our requirements on in-stream flows and freshwater inflows into the bay, and the environmental assessments, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But I stopped and I removed the language about the work group being created, and I inserted that we believe a structural reorganization of the data presented will benefit the understanding of environmental assessments in the 2021 Regional Plan. And I bulleted the recommendations that you adopted in August. So this is just a recap in paragraph form for our internal use on what our recommendations were previously, and putting it into the paragraph for our guiding principle. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions on the revised language here?
There's nothing new.
Okay. I think it's more descriptive than it was.
That's right.
Yes. Okay?
We adopt these as we go.
Yes, we will.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the guiding principle with respect to environmental assessment work group's recommendation.
I'll second.
All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign?
Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you for your work, Stephen, appreciate it.
It was a pleasure.
Next is the group that was working on the minimum standards work group, and that was led by Tim Andrus. So if you would like to go through.
Sure. So in your packet, you have a document that we'll be discussing. It's on the screen here. The work group met a number of times over the past couple of months. All the members, well, there's a variety of levels of participation by those involved. Ultimately, after those initial meetings and the discussions of the concerns and issues, we began drafting a document like this. And I'd like to point out a few things. I won't read it, but I'll point out a few things. We took the approach that we were trying to establish a guideline, not rules, not a way of filtering, at least the approach I took, of filtering out projects or restricting certain projects and so on, but rather give the group some guidance on how we would approach the elements necessary for a proposed strategy to actually be a water management strategy. And if those conditions were satisfied, then a water management strategy under certain circumstances could be considered and presented and adopted by this group as a recommended water management strategy, an alternate water management strategy, and then the third class of strategies, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Now, referring to this document, I point out that we started with trying to define what a water management strategy is. I won't read these, but items 1, 2, and 3, at least from my perspective, are restating the obvious. Water management strategy has to serve a need. Water management strategy will have to be evaluated given the established rules of Texas Water Development Board, and we would have to take into consideration things like environmental flow standards.
Items 4, 5, and 6, I think, are where we try to expand and provide some guidance. The first, item 4, we wanted to ensure that any strategy that came forward, that being proposed, had a strategy sponsor. I think while that may have been assumed, I think we've run into instances where that may not have been as clear as it should have been. Certainly all parties that would sponsor the project need to be on board with that project. That's what we're proposing here. We also wanted to make sure that water management strategies identified those entities that would be impacted. And so the write-up on a water management strategy would need to include that, again, to be considered for either recommended or alternative. And then finally, item 6, we think these strategies need to identify those groundwater conservation districts and/or if the TCEQ would have jurisdiction over the proposed strategy. So those are from our view, what we're proposing. And I should point out, I think there's consensus from the work group. This has been reviewed by all members of the work group, so I don't think that it's not supported, and I certainly supported it. These are the minimum elements of a water management strategy. From there, we tried to identify what the minimum requirements would be, or guidance, let's say not minimum requirements, but guidance for a strategy to be considered recommended. We try to point out that we're striving as a group to recommend water management strategies to satisfy all water needs. Later in the document, we identify that, well, not preferable, the possibility of not all needs being met can occur, and we allow for that certainly in this guidance document. We try to be clear that under this proposal that the the regional planning group strives to honor or support the wishes of those proposing strategies in terms of what strategies are recommended and alternative or proposed as alternative. And then finally, we make it clear that prior to designating water management strategies as recommended, those strategies would have to be evaluated and the cost and the environmental sensitivity evaluated per the Texas Water Development Board rules, and that's the end of that paragraph. We were also tasked with addressing management supplies. We didn't define that term, but I think you can look to the first sentence there to define it. From our perspective, it's that the cumulative supply of all recommended water management strategies. And I think our goal here with this statement is to point out that there is a need for management supplies. That is a volume over and above what's needed. Let me be clear. That the total volume of recommended management strategies will be greater than the total needs for any one time period. And that's a good approach, because frankly there's a lot of uncertainties, as you've heard today, clearly pointed out today, a lot of uncertainty as to whether any one strategy will move forward and be implemented. And so by allowing for management supplies, we address those uncertainties as a group, and we're recommending that be allowed. I'll point out, and I've heard other people in the past speak to, perhaps it should be a particular percentage or a maximum amount of additional supply. This proposal doesn't suggest that sort of thing, but rather it be a judgment call of the regional planning group. The next paragraph simply points out and acknowledges that there's a possibility that certain needs may not be satisfied, but if that's the case, we'll clearly document why that's the case as part of the regional plan. I think that's our current practice as it is today. Regarding alternative strategies, as we all know, we have more strategies than there are needs. We go through a process of designating certain recommended and alternative. Our position here, much like recommended, is we think it's a good approach to try to follow the desires of those proposing those strategies as whether or not they're designated, recommended, or alternative. We're trying to point that out. And then the final item, let me point out first, this is the grouping of strategies that we've previously called water management strategies needing further study. We're proposing that they be retitled as conceptual approaches. And the reason for that is these are typically have been projects that are innovative perhaps, haven't been fully developed, couldn't be fully evaluated, and in particular wouldn't meet those criteria that we established at the beginning of the document, so it wouldn't be appropriate to call them water management strategies. So we're suggesting a new title, conceptual approaches. We think it's a good thing to have those identified in the regional water plan, and we're suggesting that that should continue. And really no change as to our normal practice over the years, at least since I've been involved, in terms of these sorts of strategies being listed in the plan. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. For what it's worth, I recommend this as a guiding principle for the planning group.
Any questions regarding this recommendation?
I'd like to make a comment that I think Tim and his work group did an outstanding job, put some time and thought put in on this, and the rest of us are very appreciative.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Yes, Tim, thank you. Y'all did a great job.
I move approval.
All right, Kevin moves for approval. What is-
Second.
Okay, Gary seconds. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? All right, great. So that one's approved. All right, so now we're moving into number 14, which included the role of reuse within the regional water plan and I guess the issue of funding for innovative strategies, is that correct? Is that right? You want to go, are you presenting this one, Cole? Or did somebody, I don't think we had a work group on this. We just discussed it, I think, in the meeting last time.
Yeah, so at the May meeting and at the August meeting, Brian did a in-depth sort of overview of the historic role of reuse within the regional water plan. Based on those comments and notes taken, basically there were several things that were agreed upon by the planning group generally. And so the idea was to take those comments and formulate a guiding principle based on those comments, present it to the group today, and see if there's any editing or comments that need to be incorporated into the guiding principle as it is, and then try to get it approved so that we can kind of close out the guiding principle process. The guiding principle for the role of reuse, basically there were, I think Brian, I don't have the charts that Brian was going over, but there were, their role with, it plays a role within cumulative effects. You want to go over there real quick?
Yeah, existing supply analysis, water management strategy evaluation, and cumulative effects. Those are three areas where we do surface water modeling that the planning group in the past has chosen to include or not include reuse and effluent.
Right. And so essentially the Texas Administrative Code kind of lays out what modeling procedures will be used in developing the regional water plan in those categories. And so this was written to sort of defer to those rules, with the exception of contracted reuse and
Direct reuse and pre-existing contracts.
right. So direct reuse, water maintenance strategies, or pre-existing contract versus direct reuse. And then with regard to the identifying special studies and the funding of those kind of put into the same guiding principle. Generally, at the last several meetings, meetings when this was talked about. It was noted that there is no additional funding for such studies. However, to the extent that the Texas Administrative Code allows for those types of studies or water management strategies that are innovative, they can be considered within the normal regional water planning deadlines and rule structure. So this guiding principle just acknowledges that and leaves open the possibility of considering such studies and water management strategies as they arise.
Any questions on this? Now, I understand, right, Brian, that if this guiding principle is adopted, this is what you've reflected in the item that's coming up on the hydrologic assumptions as to how we would move forward regarding reuse. So, and this is a little different than what we've done in the past relative to reuse. I think we've had a hybrid kind of approach over some years. Yes?
I think I fully understand the first paragraph. I would like to have a little better understanding of the first sentence and the second in relation to agreeing that effluent will be depicted in the regional water plan only in cases of direct reuse water management strategies or where a pre-existing contract for the supply of reuse is in place. And I guess one of the things I'm just wanting clarified is the use of effluent in that first clause and reuse in the second. I just want to make sure I understand this sentence correctly.
Just the terminology, because
Yes.
the terminology changed?
Yes.
Brian, would you suggest that we use the word reuse in that? The terminology changed from reuse in the first paragraph to effluent in the second, and I guess it's just a question of, are we defining that word differently? Is that what is your concern, Tom?
Yeah, it's within that, actually all within the first sentence of the second paragraph. You know, I'm not clear on the meaning of that because of the way those terms are utilized.
Right. Are they interchangeable is the question.
What if you said reuse of effluent the first time and then you left the other ones alone? Would that work?
Yes, Steve?
Maybe a little more information here. I guess the way I would interpret that first sentence is that when you use the term effluent, that is the actual water, the discharge from the treatment plant. So it's kind of the source, it's the
Right.
resource. When you get into the second sentence, again, planning group would not use effluent, the resource, in the estimates of the cumulative effects unless a direct reuse water management strategy or a contract for supply of reuse. So that is then the use of that resource of effluent is kind of the way I would characterize that. Now, I don't know if that helps in your understanding of that or your comfort with those words, but that's at least the way I would interpret that. But that's subject to the planning group's discretion.
So I guess it's not considered reuse unless there's a reuse of it. Otherwise, it's a supply, effluent.
And where that may be significant is in the existing supply analysis. Essentially, this says we will not have effluent in the existing supply analysis.
I would agree with that. I guess the question I would pose in relation to this, you know, in using the word depicted in there in the regional water plan, if there were a water supply strategy that were based on an indirect reuse, you know, with a bed and banks permit involved, you know, would this rule out having a water supply strategy of that nature? Depicted is a word that is pretty broad.
Yeah, yes, I don't think we want to.
I don't think you want to rule out.
We don't want to rule out indirect.
Something that under state law is allowable with a bed and banks permit.
But if you say that pre-existing contract for the supply of the use might be, I get your
if one views the bed and banks permit as a contract, that might be true, but I guess, I mean, I'm just kind of caught up in the terminologies used here, what we may inadvertently rule out.
Yeah, in the case of a water management strategy, particularly one that's pretty far out in the future, you wouldn't necessarily have a contract, but you could have, like in the case of Canyon Regional and the San Antonio River Authority, we have a memorandum of understanding. So in that case, that is the, I guess, imprimatur of using, effluent in the firm yield calculation of that water management strategy.
And any inclusion in the water plan would, if you could categorize as depicting that. So I think it's just something that we need to clarify the wording on there. I don't know that I'm gonna try to craft that, but
Can we just say included? Change the statement to included? It's better, reads better.
I think where we get in trouble here is in part in where we use depicted and only in cases of direct.
Could you say direct, or and indirect reuse water management strategy? So if someone were to bring,
Yeah, I think that might
if you just
help
added
solve
it
it.
there, that effluent will be depicted in the only in the cases of direct or indirect reuse management, reuse management, reuse water management strategies, and where a pre-existing contract for supply of reuse is in place. So someone can bring forward a strategy that is an indirect, whether it's on a bed and banks authorization or whatever. Would that fix your issue?
Yeah, and I would do it in the second sentence also.
I'm sorry, what do you say?
I would put the word indirect in the second sentence also.
Okay,
Yeah, I think that would substantially solve it.
direct, and, would it be or, okay. And or, I would put and or up there too, just in case, just to make sure. Okay, does that fix your concern?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, any other comments on this? Do you think we're ready to take action on this today, or? Now, the innovative strategy one is, of course, they talked about it under the work that Tim did over here, that, we want, if there are innovative strategies and that people want to bring them forward, we're open to that. This one really deals with the fact that there's currently not funding for that unless someone brings funding, or that this body decides to allocate the funding that we do get towards that study. That's what this essentially says. That somebody has to bring it forward for us to consider it in that regard. Okay? Any questions, comments, concerns?
Well, I guess between this and what we talked about and approved earlier with what Tim presented, does this change or affect the way that we had included some of the projects that had like zero firm yield? Is that changing? Are we changing how we treated those, or how we included those kinds of projects?
No, Brian, the way I understood some of those projects that had zero firm yield was because of the issue with the groundwater districts and the process that Greg and his work group worked on last time about how we were going to manage those issues. So that's why we ended up having some projects with zero firm yield in, because we had it, and then the alternate, right, came back in. Strategy. One didn't meet the requirements of the groundwater requirements, and then we had an alternative, I guess, that allowed for that. Remember?
No, yeah, I do. I'm rereading the standards.
Yeah, so maybe I'm sorry, maybe I'm going back to something we kind of already talked about.
Well, I think it's a good point.
Oh, but I mean, one could argue that number one under the minimum standards says that strategy must supply water, reduce water demands, or otherwise satisfy one or more identified needs. A 0 acre-foot water management strategy
Would not do that.
would not do that. Which 2.5 acre-foot projects now.
So.
So technically, we would not allow for that to go forward based on these rules, based on this guiding principle.
Yeah, I mean, it's, well,
Yes.
otherwise satisfy one or more identified need, and you can make another argument.
So he's saying, Brian is reading your, as saying that we're not going to have zero yield projects in this next round, because one of your basic strategies here is that it has to meet a need.
First, who's saying that?
Brian is, well, Adam asked the question, will this, the process that we put forward here, address the issue that came up last time about having projects that had a zero firm yield, which was brought up during a lot of the public comment process, if you recall. And those, the reason we had projects that had a zero firm yield was kind of the strategy that came up through the groundwater work group last time, and the MAGs and all that. So the question is now, based on the fact that you had indicated here that the strategy would have to meet a defined need, would that be interpreted that a zero firm yield would not be meeting the need?
So, no. Well, I'm coming back around now.
Yeah, thank you.
So, I mean, it says supply water, it doesn't say supply firm water. So therefore, a zero firm yield project could still be satisfy number one here?
And Brian, if I may, to that point, I served on the work group. A project with a yield of zero would still be met, would be identified to meet the need. It's just through MAG limitations that it's not available at that point in time. But during the planning cycle, it could still, with the change of DFC and MAG, meet a need and be inserted in the plan.
I'm starting to come around that we're still okay. And I'm thinking too about like we have those projects that are infrastructure like only projects, expansions. Yeah, infrastructure expansion projects, like they don't have a firm yield, but they convey water and move water around where they increase water treatment plant capacity by utilizing the same water or something. So I think we're good.
So you could still see some zero
I
firm
think,
yield.
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the heart attack.
All right, thanks for the question. Okay, getting back to now what's in front of us. The modification on the role of reuse. With that change, would anyone like to have a motion to?
Well, if I may, do we have to pass this today? Can we?
We don't have to pass it today. The only thing is, though, that this standard that we have set here, this guiding principle, is what is driving the hydrologic assumptions that we have under item 16. Now, if we do have a little time, if we don't want to adopt that right this time, we could adopt it next time. But that issue of reuse is, this guiding principle is driving the hydrologic assumptions that we have in item number 16 and one of the items.
You could still take action on hydrologic assumptions, and then your guiding principle supports that whenever you adopt it. I mean, the board doesn't require that the guiding principle.
No, I know that. But I mean, this is basically stating what you've done is you've stated your hydrologic assumptions based on this guiding principle, this approach.
But we changed that approach a little bit in the wording, correct?
Yeah, I don't think those wording affects the.
It doesn't affect it.
Hydraulic assumptions, though. At least what's not listed.
I think in relation to hydraulic assumptions, doesn't the sentence that says as per section 357.32
Yes.
of the TAC will assume full utilization of existing water rights and no return flows when using water availability models.
Correct.
That's in the TAC. That's not something we can modify.
Well, we've asked for a variance in the past. This time we are saying basically we
Yeah.
would be sticking with the Water
Language
Development
in the-
Board's
in the code.
guidance and rules.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be asking for a variance as we have in the past.
Okay.
So, I mean, if we're not ready to take action, we do not have to on either one of these issues. We can bring it back. But I just need to get a sense of the group. If y'all are hesitant, then we can wait and do it next time. I need someone to give me an indication. Am I gonna get a motion on the floor? If not, maybe that's the indication I need.
I move approval.
You move approval of the reuse?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second for that?
I'll second it.
And that's with the changes that you.
With the changes that he made, adding the
Yes.
indirect. So Ray? is it- Who seconded? You did? Okay, Gary. Okay, sorry. All right, all those in favor of adopting this guiding principle here on the screen for reuse, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. Okay, great. Now, the other guiding principle regarding the innovative strategies, I mean, I guess the issue about the funding here, the other one sort of talked a little bit about the special studies and that sort of thing. This is really about funding issues related to those. We'd have to make a funding decision.
What we've said is if there is a funding issue, either you have to have your own sponsor or be willing to pay for it yourself, or come back and ask the group to consider the funding. With that caveat being understood, I think it's good. I'd like to make a motion to approve it.
Okay, Gary moves on that guiding principle. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Kevin. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Well, before we
Oh,
vote,
I'm sorry. Sorry,
what
discussion.
Gary just said is not included in the language. He just said that it's understood. Is that what you said?
But
So
It's
the
understood
language-
because of the rules basically the
Yeah.
Water Development Board has on funding.
So the language exactly as written is what we're voting on.
Well, I think the funding issue, because I'd asked this question when we reviewed this is within the administrative rules that are identified here.
Yeah, okay.
Is that correct, Steve?
Yes, how the planning group through its political subdivision requests funding from the Water Development Board is what those rules govern.
Right.
And so if there's something that is considered innovative, it can be proposed along with any other management strategy, and the planning group gets to make that decision to develop a scope that gets approved by the Water Development Board and gets funded. But the planning group has that latitude to make that decision.
So I think that what that means is anybody here that has an innovative strategy that would want it considered would have to start putting that together as a recommendation in the calendar that we have in front of us and that will be talked about later as it relates to these water management strategies. We will be looking at these in the context of everything else that we look at for funding. If someone's got to bring it forward, we're not going to develop it ourselves necessarily. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so Diane, does that answer your question? Okay, I'm sorry, I should have asked for discussion. So any more discussion on that? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. So, got all those done. So what we're gonna do is put all these together in a document, clean it up, with these modifications that were made here, and get that out to the planning group as a consolidated document, and we'll also put it on our website. Now, again, we're not gonna be asking for any additional action in the combined document, because we've taken the actions all along. But obviously, if there is something that comes up during the process and someone wants to go back and have a discussion about any of these guiding principles, of course, we can continue to do that as we go through the process for developing the regional water plan. Is that fair?
Suzanne,
Yes.
as many of you know, this was very important to me personally. It's
Yes.
one of my swan song.
That you left for us to deal with?
Yes,
Thank you.
but I think this has been very healthy for all of us to walk through in the detail that we've done, so that we understand what we want and what our guidance should be. But in addition to that, as we get closer to the end of this planning cycle, we're gonna have this to back us up. When we start getting comments from the public, we'll have answers to many of the complaints that we didn't have real solid answers to the last cycle. And I just want to express my personal appreciation to the chair and to the members for all the work that went into this. I think it's a very valuable document.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your leadership and bringing it to us. I know it was a good exercise for all of us to go through, I agree. Okay. All right, so it is almost noon, and I want to do a time check here. We have a few items left. We can push through on the items that are left, or we can break for lunch and come back. I would imagine that, Brian, what do you think from the remaining items here, plus we have the presentation from the Evergreen? What kind of time are we looking at for the rest of this agenda?
So, I mean, based on what I've heard so far, I mean, I think like 15, 16, 17 could go relatively quickly. You know, maybe 10, 15 minutes. If that.
10, 15 minutes each or
Total. Total.
Okay, so he's
And I
saying
don't know
maybe
about-
20 minutes for his items, and then you're saying that your item will be another 20 minutes?
15, 20 minutes?
You get it in 20 minutes.
Yeah. So we're talking, within the hour, we could be out of here. Otherwise, we could break and then come back.
No,
Y'all want to push through? Do I see some nodding of heads?
Yeah.
Y'all can hold your stomachs for a minute? There's
Yep.
probably some pastries back there. Okay, then let's push through. All right, number 15. Is that okay with you?
Honestly, it may not even take 15 minutes for me, so under this item is the consultant work schedule thing. Under that one, I have two things. Before you is a list of the updated projects for Black Beach and their sub-consultants in the region and how they, what we're currently working on, essentially, we're contractually obligated to. So you have that information. The other item I have is our schedule here. Typical schedule, updated. Updated with all the latest information, just where we stand. I will mention that we have finalized the amendments to the contract between Santa Rosa and Black Beach. So we do have our additional funding, so now these yellow stars here apply. We have funding now in task 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, and 10. So we can, at this point, we can start looking at things such as existing supply analysis, identification of water needs. We can start talking about potentially feasible water management strategies. We can work in the water policy recommendations and unique sites or stream segment extension as well. So it is anticipated that another funding block will come about probably in early 2018, in which case we'll probably allocate additional funds to some of these categories and then open up others as well. Schedule-wise, we're still doing great. In fact, I think we're maybe ahead of schedule. We are still looking at starting to do existing supply analysis, probably late this year, early next year. We can start talking about it now. And looking at that, looking at identification of needs and potential feasible water management strategies. You'll see later in one of my schedules that I'm thinking we'll do that second survey where we talk about the water management strategies with each of the individual WUGs or wholesale water providers. Late spring or early summer next year, and begin that discussion really in August meeting next year. So, any questions on schedule? That's all I have on this item then. Next item is the
Next item is the hydrologic.
hydrologic consumptions. Yes. So I have a PowerPoint here that I will pull up, but I also want to point out that I already. I don't know if this got handed out, but I've also put this into a Word document that will be attached to a letter that would go to the Water Health Board, a letter sent on behalf of the planning group by Ms. Scott. And this is basically just lists out what you're going to see in this PowerPoint here. So that is already prepared and ready to go. So hydrologic assumptions, this is not necessarily required, but it's good to document for our sake. The primary models will be what we anticipate using in this planning cycle. The first two there, the Guadalupe San Antonio WAM and the Oasis WAM, just the model itself, not the assumption necessarily going to it, just the WAM that it is. We will be using that for existing supply analysis. We're looking at using those, if necessary, for surface water management strategy evaluations. And we would be using these for cumulative effects. The flow regime application tool, the FRAC, would be used on surface water management strategies as well, evaluation of those and implementation of the environmental flow standards. The mod flow model of the Edwards Aquifer that the EAA has will provide information that will help us determine the firmness of each of the groundwater permits for the Edwards Aquifer. And then the next four, the Southern Carrizo GAM, the Central Carrizo GAM, the Gulf Coast GAM, the Trinity GAM, all of which would most likely be used in the context of the cumulative effects analysis. We will not be using those for existing supply because we have MAGs already defined. We won't be using them for water management strategy evaluation because, again, we have to stay within those MAGs. But when we start talking about groundwater, surface water interactions, and how those MAGs may affect surface water flow, we will be, and looking at drawdowns associated with those MAGs, we will be using it as the cumulative effects to at least garner that information. I've also listed in here any additional currently approved WAM or GAM necessary, and that kind of covers us in case someone comes to us and says, well, we need to look at a water management strategy in the Brazos River Basin, or the Trinity River Basin, or the Rio Grande River Basin, wherever it may be. And so I just want to put that on there. I've asterisked the WAM models, and I've double asterisked the GAM models just to say that we will acquire and download those models by May 1st of 2018. So that'll be the current version that we have. So whether it changes between now and then, that's great. If not, we'll have what we have. So I did list some secondary models here. I don't anticipate using these, but again, in case somebody comes up with a water management strategy that we haven't envisioned for a while, there's the Lower Nueces River Basin and Estuary model, also known as the New Bay model. If we have a water management strategy that affects flows to the estuary of the Nueces Estuary, we may need to use that model. HSPF models, the Edwards Aquifer recharge zones. If a recharge project over the Edwards outcrop comes about, we might have to use that. I don't anticipate that again, but it is there. And I've listed the GWSIM model of the Edwards Aquifer. It's a legacy model. It has some capabilities that the mod flow model doesn't have. It's just a safeguard in case someone were to envision a project that the mod flow model couldn't handle, but the GWSIM 4 could. That's the only reason we would use it. Surface water assumptions. WAM Run 3 will be used for all surface water rights modeling. That includes existing supply analysis, water management strategy evaluations, and cumulative effects. What that entails: full exercise of existing surface water rights, zero effluent discharges unless specifically required by a surface water right. And those include hydropower, industrial rights that have some return flow factors on them. The city of Victoria has a unique clause in there, so probably have the model as well. Operation of Canyon Reservoir will be at its firm yield in accordance to its permit, including the subordination of the senior hydropower rights. Will deliver contractual obligations from Canyon Reservoir to the point of conversion. So not everything will be taken lakeside because contractually they have to deliver that downstream to some customers. Not all of it, some of it. Firm supply of surface water. Water rights will be based on monthly availability. This is actually a requirement of the Water and Mulch Board now. This planning group was kind of revolutionary back 2 or 3 cycles ago. We were first started doing this. Since then, the board's required it. I just wanted to state it. New water rights will be evaluated in accordance. New surface water rights will be evaluated in accordance with environmental flow standards. Operation of power plant reservoirs will be subject to their full authorized consumptive uses at the reservoir with makeup diversions as necessary, and subject to water rights, insurance flow constraints, and/or applicable contractual provisions. what that basically says is that we're gonna use the full available water in the reservoir and or make supplies, whether they're run the river diversions to make up supply or contractual deliveries from others that reuse and whatnot to make that up. And that really applies only to Bronig and Calaveras Lakes here in San Antonio area and Clutter Creek down in Victoria Goliad line. Operation of Choke Canyon Reservoir Lake Corpus Christi system is safe yield subject to the TCEQ agreed order regarding freshwater inflows to Nueces Estuary. Again, I don't anticipate us actually modeling the Choke Canyon Lake Corpus Christi other than, well, no, not all. This doesn't really apply to us except for existing surface water rights that may get called on in our area. But if a strategy came out where one or more entity was interested in working with the city of Corpus Christi on some kind of swapping water, we have that provision in here. And then just to document things, the period of record, the current period of records for these models, the basic models, the WAM for the Guadalupe San Antonio is 34 through 89, the critical drop in the 50s. And in the Nueces River Basin, that WAM is from 1934 through 1970 with, 1997 with critical drought in the 90s. Any questions on surface water before I move on to groundwater? It aligns with what we saw earlier. Okay. Similar to that's been done in previous plans regarding groundwater. Reliability of existing Edwards aquifer permits and the resulting spring flows will be consistent with the HCP. And that information comes from the mod flow model from 1947 through 89, because that's what the mod flow model starts in 47 and runs past 89, but our WAM model stops in 89. For pre-47 flows, spring flows, 34 through 46, those spring flows will be a result of the GW Sim 4 model. And we already have that information, we don't actually have to recalculate it. Outside of the Edwards Aquifer, reliability of existing groundwater permits and available to new groundwater permits in the Carrizo, Wilcox, Trinity, Gulf Coast, and or any other minor aquifer that we may have to look at where DFC exists. Will be in accordance to the MAG estimates as calculated by the Water Mill Board on or before June 1st, 2018. Again, I kind of set that as a deadline. With your approval, that'd be a good deadline. I have been in contact with Larry French, the Water Mill Board. I believe we have 3 of the 5 MAGs already updated, and the other 2 are anticipated to be done first, second quarter of 2018, so we should be in good shape. And further on that, the planning group will use the process established during the 2016 planning cycle as detailed in section 8.3.1 of the 2016 plan to determine the amount of groundwater allocated to individual permits. So essentially what I'm saying is we're going to use the MAGs for each county, and within a county, we're going to use that process we established last time through the work group and everything to allocate that water out to existing permits and future permits should there be water available in the MAGs. Final point here, recycle, reuse water, however you want to say it. Source water available for reuse water management strategies. So new projects that rely on reuse will be determined based on the estimated amount of water returned to a utilities wastewater treatment plant for each decade, less the amount of reuse already being utilized as an existing supply. Basically, we're just not going to overcount that. How are we going to estimate the amount of water returning to a utilities wastewater treatment plant? Is it, as in previous cycles, it'll be estimated as 50% of the utilities projected water demand, less any drought water conservation strategy or drought management strategy. So essentially we get to wet water. 50% of that wet water comes back to the wastewater treatment plant, and that'll be what is available for reuse water management strategies, unless site-specific information is available. So if a utility comes to us and says, hey, we return about 65% of our water, we'd rather use that, we're going to allow that. But if, in the absence of any information, we're just going to say 50%. And I have an example there of how things have been calculated in 50% times this formula of the directed water mans less the conservation water management strategy, less drought management volumes, and then minus existing reuse supply. I think that's it. That's all I have.
So you've written that out in this attachment here?
I've written that out, so in the attachment, there's actually, there's a Word document, you got passed out, the Word document?
Yeah.
So yeah, in the packet, there's a Word document that looks like this, it's actually two attachments, attachment A, talks about surface water, groundwater, recycled water, pretty much just like the bullets you saw. Attachment B is just listing the models. These are the models that we primarily will use, these are additional models we may use.
And with this, there would be no variances that we would be asking for with the water?
No, I think there's no variances we're asking for. This is straightforward. This much document is much of you as a planning group telling Black Beach and other sub-consultants how to prepare your plan, but it's also confirming with the Water Own Board how you're going to do your plan.
Tom?
And I think in relation to the reuse, recycle, source water availability formula, I think with the language you have, it's fine, allowing for site-specific information, but just as a point of information, I just want to point out that what the formula doesn't take into consideration are two factors that I think are significant. Those of us that operate water and wastewater systems know that inflow and infiltration of rainwater into our wastewater systems can be very considerable in terms of the actual water return to our wastewater plants. And that a 50% kind of arbitrary assumption based on your production numbers, completely ignores the effects of I&I, and inflows. And obviously, we keep track of what's, received at the plant. So, we have the site-specific information to show what those inflows look like. But in wet years, we're way over 50% if you look at those numbers on an annual basis. And the other point I would simply make in relation to water conservation, for entities that have year-round water conservation rules about irrigation watering, and that's the primary cause of water not being returned to the wastewater system. If people move into restrictions and have more stringent restrictions than maybe some other utilities, I guess what I'm saying is that formula kind of arbitrarily, works against them in relation to mounting reuse projects in relation to how much source water would be available for those. But given the site-specific information, I think, the language is permissive of that being considered. So don't have a problem with it, but I just wanted to point out that formulaically, there are two pretty important concepts there that are ignored.
All good points. At the 50%, I'll just tell you where that comes from. Over my years of working with the planning group, we've looked at utilities in the area, and particularly in typically dry years, and if you just ignore I&I or whatever, you just look at what's produced by a utility's water treatment plant versus what is influenced to the wastewater treatment plant. It generally ranges between 55 and 65%, and it does change. 50% was thought to be a little on the conservative side, just to make sure we weren't overestimating the source water availability of our produced water. But again, if San Marcos would like me to look at their information and or present me with information that says it should be closer to 60% or something, we can certainly do that because we have the clause in there. And I know Saul's has already mentioned this to me that they would like to look at theirs as a site-specific number.
I'll move to approve attachment A and B.
All right. Any,
I'll second.
Second from Gary. Any other questions, comments? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? All right, great, thank y'all.
The last thing I have to do, and this is a board requirement as well, is identification of potentially feasible water management strategies. Within each plan cycle, every planning group has to document the way they're going to go about listing out and potentially looking at potentially feasible water management strategies that they may or may not evaluate and move forward with in the plan. So this is an update to the way this was done before a little bit. essentially, this first paragraph and these first bullets essentially state that the 2021 plan is really an update to the 2016 plan. We're not going to recreate the wheel, but we recognize the fact that certain things have changed between the 2016 planning cycle and the 2021 planning cycle. Those are enumerated in number 1, A through G, that there's updated population and municipal water demand projection information. The Water Development Board has shifted away from city-based water user groups to utility-based water user groups, thereby changing the size of a WUG and who they deliver water to. There's been updates in methodologies for calculating non-municipal water demand projections. D, that groundwater availability will incorporate the latest MAG values, as we talked about earlier, as part of this process. And now the Water Development Board allows for a MAG peaking factor that we, as a planning group, can choose to use or not, but just recognizing that it exists. Number F, that the Edwards Aquifer Habitat Conservation Plan has been approved, which when we did this the last time it hadn't been approved yet, and is being implemented successfully. It hadn't been implemented much at all at that point. And that environmental flow standards by TCQ are defined for the river basins of the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Area, which that process was still ongoing last time as well. So that just kind of enumerates things that have changed since the last planning cycle that may or may not affect the water management strategies. Essentially feasible water management strategies. The second part of this says, given all that, the process by which we're going to select them is as follows. To break it down, essentially we're going to use the 2016 water management strategy list for each individual WUG or wholesale water provider as the basis for that, and or any additional information we may have gathered since that time. So Saul's water management plan is a great example of that. We now have updated information from them, so I'd be silly to go back to the 2016 plan when I have their 2017 information in front of me. We are going to solicit information. We're going to send this information out, draft a list of that information based on the 2016 plan, local water plans, other strategies perceived of interest by the water wholesale provider. We're going to draft a list and send that out to each of the individual water user groups and/or wholesale water providers during the summer of 2018. And we will solicit information back on that. And when they do submit that information, we'll ask if they recommend, alternative, or reject a certain water management strategy and/or any additional strategy they may want to evaluate. Considering the information from the solicitation, we'll compile a list of potentially feasible water management strategies, and we'll prepare comments based on those comments received, and we'll start presenting those in beginning with the August 2018 meeting. It is envisioned that we won't nail down every single water management strategy in August 2018 that we're going to look at. Probably similar to last time, it'll be a process of several meetings where we identify water management strategies for certain water user groups or wholesale water providers. We'll draft those scopes of work, we'll get them approved by Water Development Board, and so on. I think we took about 4 meetings to do that last time, so about a year. Additional information may come subsequent meetings. Additional water management strategies can be brought forth to the planning group at any time, so just because someone didn't get the survey back to us in time doesn't mean it's dead in the water. However, I did stipulate that the May 2019 planning group meeting kind of be the drop-in date for that. If we haven't heard from you by then, we really can't add any additional water management strategies beyond that point in time. We still have time to evaluate them and get them in the plan. And then finally, the planning group will utilize the minimum standards guiding principle. I'm not going to read the whole thing, that you guys just approved today as the way to evaluate water management strategies. So that's what this document talks about. That's the process I've laid out in draft form. It's open to revision. You guys can change it if you wish. If you think it's a bad idea, let me know.
Does anybody have any questions on this. I just want to make sure then that if you're using the previous plan as the starting point, that does not mean that new strategies or something that wasn't in that plan would not be able to come forward, because you're asking for more. You're saying, this is the list we have, you can either subtract or add to this list.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the intent. Is we don't want to just solicit information from people and say, okay, what's your water management strategies? Tell us what it is. We want to give them a starting point.
Yes.
And they can modify that as they see fit.
Okay. Does everybody understand that? Yes,
I
sir.
do have one question, and this is, I guess, just a small one, but in relation to outlining, what will be used in evaluating strategy, should we make some reference to the hydrologic item we just passed in terms of what modeling we'll use? I think we've talked about, the standards and, the minimum standards and establishment of the management supply guiding principle, but shouldn't we at least mention the hydrologic assessment?
So this document's all just about identifying potentially feasible water emissions. It's
Not the process
it's not
for
the process of
analyzing.
actually evaluating or picking them to go in the plan. It's really just, this is the process by which we're gonna gather our
Solicit,
information
right.
and come up with our list of ones that you may or may not choose to go forward with.
Thank you.
Did you, and I may have missed this, but when you ask them for that information of the list, are you also asking them, have they done any, do they have any available information that would help in analysis that they could identify at the time?
They certainly can.
It seemed to me that if they have done their own engineering studies or have, available information that would help in our evaluation, that would give you a sense of what's available.
We typically ask that after.
You do? Oh,
Yeah, so
okay.
so this document lays out how we're gonna basically get that feedback on our list. At some point after August, or beginning with August of next year, we'll start talking about which strategies need to be evaluated.
Okay.
And we do that. Once we've scoped that item and allocated a portion of our funds to that, and the board approves of that, I'll typically reach out to the entity that's requested it and, and say, you said you have a Carrizo project, tell me more about it.
Okay.
And at that time, if they have a study or information, they will provide it.
Okay.
And we'll make sure we do
Okay,
that.
great.
We don't want to recreate the wheel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if that would be information that you would want to know prior to scoping, so that if you.
I could ask it early on, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It may be
that's a good
helpful
idea.
that way when you're scoping, if you knew that there was, obviously you're going to have to do it in the right format that we need it in, but I don't know, just suggestion.
I'll move to approve the draft.
Second.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right, all those in favor of approving this draft for how we're going to identify potentially feasible water management strategies, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. All right, great. Moving through this stuff. All right, wonderful. So next is our presentation from the Evergreen on their presentation on water modification.
Suzanne, the presentation's not really by Evergreen per se, but I'd like to introduce Jonathan Jennings and
Oh, okay.
Kendall LaRoche. They're meteorologists for a couple of different Weather Modification Association programs here in Texas.
Oh, okay.
Kendall is our local meteorologist for the South Texas Weather Modification Association program, of which Evergreen and Edwards Aquifer Authority are major sponsors of. And so I asked them to do a presentation for the board, just for informational purposes, kind of educate you on what the program does and look at some of the results of that that we've accumulated.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm trying to locate the flash card.
Now, as Russell stated, my name is Jonathan Jennings. I'm a meteorologist with the West Texas Weather Modification Association, and this is my colleague Kendall LaRoche. We're going to kind of tag team this presentation, give you a little overview of what weather modification is. I'll let you know about some of the analysis and results we get from our operations, as well as go into the benefits of the program. And then we'll get into where weather modification sits right now in the regional and state water planning, so we can move forward with weather mod, hopefully in the Region L plan down the road.
Thank you, John. All right, let's start off with describing weather modification. Weather modification is, in general, any effort to alter artificially the natural phenomena of the atmosphere. This includes cloud seeding, which is the addition of agents that will alter the phase and size distribution of cloud particles with the intent of influencing precipitation. The Texas overall weather modification goal is to enhance the precipitation across each project area in the safest and most cost-effective manner possible. Cloud seeding has been done in Texas since 1995, has been done every year since, and there were 5 projects across the state in 2017 focusing on areas where rainfall is limited. The South Texas Weather Modification Association covers these 10 counties and is based out of the Pleasanton Airport. There are multiple benefits from cloud seeding, including increased precipitation, aquifer recharge enhancement, multiple agricultural impacts, increased runoff from rivers and streams, decreased groundwater consumption, and wildland bioreduction. Rainfall enhancement is achieved by releasing material into clouds to increase the precipitation efficiency. The precipitation efficiency is how much rain actually falls versus how much potential rain a cloud holds. Cloud seeding does not create clouds or storms. Seeding only increases the efficiency of those already raining or about to rain. Cloud seeding. The 2 processes within clouds that create rain are the warm rain process and the cold rain process, which I will briefly describe here. The warm rain process happens when the entire cloud or storm is warmer than freezing. Basically, microscopic cloud particles collide and stick to form larger drops, and these larger drops continue to collide and form and stick until they grow large enough to fall as rain. As a real quick example, a randomly oriented group of microscopic cloud particles. Once a large cloud drop forms, this large cloud drop descends and collects other drops as it falls. It grows even larger, falls even faster, and eventually this drop will continue falling, break out, or evaporate. The other process is the cold rain process, and this takes place when the lower part of the cloud is warmer than freezing, but the middle and upper parts of the cloud are colder than freezing. During this process, ice crystals form in the upper part of the cloud, then descend, melt, and finally fall as rain. As another real quick example, let's say we have a bunch of randomly oriented super cold cloud drops, and super cold means that the drops are liquid even though the temperature is below freezing. Once we get a cloud or ice crystal to form, the water vapor from the surrounding drops goes to the ice crystal. This ice crystal then grows larger from the water vapor. This ice crystal grows heavy enough to fall, and which collects additional super cold drops as it falls, and eventually the crystal falls below the freezing level, melts, and then falls as rain. The issue with natural clouds is that not all the potential rain within a cloud falls. There are just not enough microscopic particles in the natural atmosphere for all the water vapor to attach and stick to. Thus, the water vapor will just stay within the cloud. So the material we use for cloud seeding to increase rain efficiency includes silver iodide and calcium chloride. Silver iodide is used for the cold rain process because this material has a structure very similar to an ice crystal. So when silver iodide is added to a targeted storm, it helps create more ice crystals within the storm. And the more ice crystals means the cold rain process is more efficient. Calcium chloride is useful for the warm rain process because this material contains numerous spaces for water vapor to attach and stick to, and is very good for creating large cloud drops. More large cloud drops means a more efficient warm rain process. So to get this material into storms, each association uses flares attached to aircraft. The individual flares are mounted on racks, which are attached to aircraft wings and then flown directly to the storm. The flares are burned within a storm updraft, which generates a trail of seeding material behind the aircraft, which is then ingested and dispersed throughout the storm. As an example, looking at a cross-section of an idealized storm, the aircraft would position itself along the leading edge of the updraft, which is indicated by green arrows. After the flares are burned, the material travels up into the storm where it interacts with water vapor and supercooled water, enhancing the rain process. There is no environmental or public health hazard from this cloud seeding material. Each airplane can hold up to 76 flares. Each association has multiple aircraft. For operations, we use a computer program called Titan that is used to identify, track, and evaluate potential storms for us to cloud seed. The software is used to display weather radar and aircraft location all on one screen. Here's a general example of what a Titan display looks like. We have radar data overlaid on top of a map. The yellow numbers represent individual storm IDs, and then the green line near the center of the image represents the aircraft track. This Titan program also has the capability to evaluate the storms we cloud seed with similar but unseeded storms. This way we can compare seeded storms with unseeded storms and measure the results. I'd now like to go through one quick example of seeding operations from this past August. This event took place across Atascosa County and consisted of 2 storms which formed at roughly the same time and within the same environment. One of these storms was seeded at the storm's beginning, while the other storm was not seeded. So shown here is a Titan image just before the aircraft began cloud seeding at 4:12 p.m. The white circle indicates the location of what would become the seeded storm, while the red circle outlines what will become the unseeded storm, and the aircraft track is in pink. The pilot reported a strong updraft at 4:14 p.m., so between 4:14 and 4:18, 7 flares were burned within this storm, after which the pilot moved on to other storms. And by 4:24, both the seeded and unseeded storm developed storm identification polygons, and the numbers within the polygons represent the maximum radar reflectivity values. So looking ahead, you can see the storm on the left, which was cloud seeded, is much larger than the one on the right, which was not seeded. And then through natural progression, both storms were gone just a little after 5 p.m. After evaluating the storm properties between the seeded and unseeded storms, the seeded storm was stronger, had a larger area, and produced more rain. So from here, I'd like to switch back over to John, who will give more details on the rainfall analysis.
So we have an independent contractor from Texas Tech University that takes all of our Titan data and puts it into the program Titan, and he's able to compare all the seeded storms versus all the unseeded storms within the target area. There are some days where we don't have a control cloud. On those days, we just assume the increase is based on our climatology that we have been able to develop over the last 10 years. And in the South Texas target area, you can see the analysis. This is increases per year in acre feet. During our season, which runs basically from March through October, we've had about 16.5 inches across the entire target area of rainfall. And the analysis conducted by Dr. Ruiz at Tech shows an increase of about 0.91 inches over the last 13 years. So that's about a 6.3% increase. And annually, we're producing close to 530,000 acre feet a year. The highest total was back in 2004, according to this chart, but that includes several other counties that are no longer participating, with the lowest total back in 2011 of 181,000 acre feet. And again, this is not rain creation, this is rain enhancement. So we need to have a cloud there for us to work with. So during the drought years, we're actually less effective because there's just not enough resources available for us to do the work. So it's really wet years where we're able to do a lot of the cloud seeding and pretty much fill up our reserves to get us through several of the drought years. The water utilities manager of San Angelo, he admitted back in 2011 that without the WeatherMod program being in long term, we might not have been able to get through that drought year without running out of water. 2007 was also a low year. It was just simply too wet for us to continue seeding. We are licensed and regulated by the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. Therefore, there are suspension criteria that do take place. And during those wet years, it can be up to water district managers or the TDLR to cut us off. So overall, we're producing about 6.8 million acre feet since 2004. Again, I explained why we have those very low totals, but that's a good baseline for us, because one of the issues with WeatherMod is we're not able to take this water, put it in a pipe, and guarantee it to you every single year. This is very random and variable. But really, across all the target areas, the lowest number we can really bank on is 175,000 acre feet. We could pretty much guarantee that over a course of a year. Hopefully we don't have another 2011, but that was a very extreme case for us. So what kind of benefits do we see out of this? Well, Kendall went over a lot of the benefits, but we wanted to put some dollar signs next to those numbers. So Dr. Johnson out of Texas A&M, he assumed a 1-inch increase over all the target areas in Texas, and looked at 3 major agricultural impacts, such as increasing dry land crop revenues, cost savings to irrigated acreage, and then increasing grazing land revenues. And the numbers he came up with were pretty big. You can see each individual county there, including the totals on the bottom. The program in South Texas is run off a budget of around $400,000, and we're seeing a direct economic impact of about $5.6 million just for the agricultural part of weather modification. Of course, though, that was assuming 1-inch increase. We don't quite see that in the South Texas target area. And the reason for that is there's a lot of maritime clouds that come off the Gulf. Those clouds are pretty efficient to begin with, so when we start seeing those, we're not going to see a greater impact in those clouds than we will continental clouds that have a lot of very small particles like dust particles, sulfates, and aerosols. So the analysis, or the benefit analysis, was based on that 1 inch. So if we only look at, say, 3/4 of an inch, we're still seeing a ratio of 20 to 1. So for every dollar that the Evergreen Water District is putting into this program, they're seeing a return of $20 just on the agricultural side of things. Dr. Johnson did use multiplier that he had to look at the statewide impacts, and that increases the ratio of 39 to 1. But we're more concerned with that direct impact. Of course, the other areas of benefit is increased aquifer recharge. Dr. Green at the Southwest Research Institute and I did a study which showed aquifer recharge enhancement over the Edwards Trinity by about 100,000 acre feet per year. Studies using the same methodology over the Edwards aquifer show an increase of about 3,600 acre feet a year, but that's just over the recharge zone. We're not looking at the drainage areas. They've informed me that they're going to do some modeling to compare the numbers, and I expect the modeling to show double, if not triple, the amount of recharge values for the Edwards aquifer. Of course, we haven't been able to look at increasing runoff into lakes, rivers, and reservoirs. We have a plan in place to try to value how much weather modifications benefit is for that, but also wildlife enhancement, hail suppression, pollution suppression, and fire suppression, among many others. So where does this stand in the water planning right now? If you were to look at the 2017 Texas State Water Plan and search WeatherMod, you would see 2 quick indications of it. In 8.2.2 strategy types, other, only really credits weather modification with 22,000 acre feet a year, and this is across the entire state. Of course, I understand that Texas Water Development Board, they look at everything based on drought years, but still, you know, we've guaranteed over each target area 100,000 acre feet a year. 5 target areas, that's 500,000 acre feet a year we can guarantee. Looking into the regional water planning, I looked in Region L, couldn't find anything on weather modification. Region F, they did a very good job, very extensive look at weather modification, but then only came back with 6,700 acre feet a year into their water plan for weather mod. And then Region A, very slight mention, that's up in the Panhandle. We have a program up there. So we're trying to figure out where weather modification stands in the water planning and how we could help create some credibility for the program. We really need weather modification in the water plan. We're not trying to recruit new programs. We're not trying to do anything like that. What we need is when we go into the state to lobby for money, because this used to be, the state used to pay into the programs to help the water districts. It kind of got us going back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that money has run out, and it's time for a new flux of money. So we've been lobbying the last 4 years, and we've come close, but just not close enough. We get thrown in Article 11. The legislatures pick up the phone, call over to the Water Development Board and ask about weather mod, and they don't really have much to say because there's not much out there. So we're having to really increase our presence with the Texas Water Development Board and inform them on what we're doing. But I met with Peter Lake a couple weeks ago, and he agrees that weather modification has a place in the state water plan, but it's up to the regional water planning groups to make sure that happens. So I would just like to suggest to y'all to take weather modification more serious and help us out and look at putting us into your water plan. So when the next session comes around, or 2019, 2021, we have some more credibility when we walk into those offices. So in conclusion, you guys learned a lot about weather modification, I hope. The main objective here is to increase precipitation. We also do hail suppression. The analysis shows that we can guarantee 175,000 acre-feet a year over the South Texas Weather Modification Association target area. We've seen increases upwards to 1 million acre-feet a year. Benefits from weather modification far outweigh the cost of operations. We have a very long-term data set which proves that the analysis of weather modification is no longer debatable. That's always been an issue, is how can you tell one cloud's not going to do that already? But when you're looking at 1,000 samples, it becomes pretty apparent that what we're doing is working. And also, we believe weather modification should be in the Region L water plan as well as the other water plans where weather modification is active. So with that said, I thank you for your time. I know everybody's hungry, but I really appreciate it. And Kendall and I are here for some questions. Yes, sir.
The second or third chart that you put up said that we can make it rain if it's already raining.
Right.
I mean, I think y'all are snake oil salesmen.
Okay.
I just don't. That's,
Why? Why would you say that though?
you can make it rain if it's already raining.
Okay, so a cloud's an open system, right? So
Everything you said is, we assume this, our model shows that. Well, who made the model? I mean,
who made what model?
well, you quote models.
Okay, so let's talk about rain enhancement in general. All right, so you have a thunderstorm coming from the west. It's springtime. Your cloud bases are sitting 12,000 feet, very high. You have a lot of dust in the air. And you have this very dark cloud base, and you see virga. Virga's evaporating rain. We get to the cloud, we seed it, we try to enhance the efficiency of which the cloud works. And next thing you know, that virga starts going to the ground. We've done this thousands of times in the last 20 years.
If you could really do that, wouldn't the counties that are downstream of your area sue you for taking their rain away from them?
No, because a cloud's an open system again. So when we're pulling moisture out of a cloud, the cloud's going to pull moisture out of the air from around it. So in fact, what we're doing, when you have a super cold water droplet, that's water, and you turn it into an ice crystal, it releases heat. And what happens when you put heat in a hot air balloon? The hot air balloon rises. Well, the cloud will rise as well, increasing the lifetime of that cloud. The analysis over the last 15 years shows that we increase cloud lifetime by 15 to 20%. And if you look at rain gauge studies, across both the South Texas and the West Texas target areas, percent of normal rainfall within the West Texas target area is 102% of normal. To the west, where our storms are coming from, it's 89% of normal. That's a 13% difference. To the east, it's actually 105% of normal. So we're actually increasing rainfall for some of the areas that don't participate in the program. I understand skepticism, but come at me with data if you want to.
Any planning group members have any questions or comments that they'd like to share regarding this? Did you have anything, Evergreen? Russell? Roland?
Let me just say, because Edwards has been participating in this operation, I think, since 1999 or thereabouts. And I think for consideration to the skeptics, when you look at your water management planning and what strategies you're going to employ, for us as a regulatory body, there are a lot of things we can do to limit people's use of their water to try to carry us through droughts. This is one of the few tools at our disposal where we can actually try to enhance something to where we're not having to hit people hard with reducing the permits. So in times when we're having rainfall, if we can enhance it to where more gets in the aquifer in these times of plenty, I've seen that this is probably per acre foot of enhancement is probably one of the most cost-efficient ways of at least trying something that can help us weather the drought, so to speak, before we get to the drought. And then the economic benefits also to suppressing demand during those periods of time to where people are not watering because you're squeezing out as much as you can out of that cloud. I've heard all the debates on both sides of it, but we still participate and hope to continue to if our board continues to support it. But that's why we participated and valued it as a potential tool to keep in place.
Have you got any feedback from any of your irrigators or other people within your district that they appreciate the?
One of them's right here. But I don't know, Adam, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it every time it comes up, there's discussion and controversy about it, but I think Medina and Uvalde counties are appreciative of what EAA can do for us out there.
Yes.
How do you get this into the plan? I mean, how do you expect to, like with Sauls or somebody say that we're spending this much money and they say, well, we're gonna give you this much water, is that how? I don't know how he said they need to get it in the plan, but how would we get that in as a strategy? I'm not sure how that.
Somebody would have to be the sponsor.
So the people who are already sponsoring the deal could put it in there and then we would decide it based on their science, how much water they would provide.
Well, I think it would be someone that's a water user group would have to indicate that they were wanting to use this as a potential supply, yes? Or, I mean, I was wondering, what about the ag? You know, typically in the past, we've indicated that we can't fully meet the ag need. Could it be identified there as a potential strategy to meet the agricultural need, for example?
It could, we'd have to identify some kind of, whatever the firm supply was.
Right.
Through the drought record.
Yeah, and that's the challenge.
That's the challenge. I mean, yeah, we could recommend this strategy for agriculture across multiple counties or whatever. We could come up with a cost, but to, you know, how does increased rainfall turn into a defined firm supply through the drought record?
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Yeah.
We've studied this in previous plans, and it's always been a challenge.
That's exactly right. So you really wouldn't be able to identify it as a firm yield.
Unless you have a whole lot of rain barrels.
Well, I mean, we did a similar approach when we looked at the brush management option in Gonzales County, where there was an estimate of what would be the deep percolation from that practice, and then we used the GAM model to estimate a potential increase in, you know, what would be considered the MAG at that point. I mean, there could be some similar type of methodologies that you could use to do this if the planning group chose.
So I guess then, based on what we've already approved, if someone wants to put this together as a strategy to present, then this group could decide if we wanted to allocate funding toward it to evaluate it as a strategy, innovative strategy to be looked at by the group and for funding to be used. Or if it's a leveraged funding, someone brings some funding to the table and then would need some additional funding from this group. So I think you're gonna have to work with someone to sponsor it as a strategy to bring it forward for consideration by the group as we move through this process next year.
Yeah, we're not looking for additional funding. We want to take what Evergreen's already doing and get that put in.
Well, but for it to be considered, it would have to go through the recipe that we have to do through the Water Development Board process. So y'all would have to put it together and make sure that it, based on what we've talked about relative to what we need to see from it, for this group to consider whether or not they would want it to be identified. We've got a certain amount of limitation of funding and a limitation of time that our consultant has to look at things. So we're gonna have to prioritize their work and their funding and so we're gonna have to figure out, how you would fit in to that prioritization.
Suzanne, will the sponsorship have to come from an entity like Evergreen or EAA, or would it have to come from the water user group?
Evergreen and EAA certainly could propose it, because if you're looking at the ag sector or the livestock water use, those are county-wide water user groups that don't have, a singular entity that speaks for them, if you will. So some of the regional entities, like groundwater districts, could certainly do that.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
In lieu of time, get out of here, let me, just a point of information. Back in 1995, when I was an extension agent in Atascosa County, we got interested in this, and a group of us went to San Angelo, because they already had a weather model group going great there. And they gave us data on how it had increased their rainfall overall up there. And I can't recall what it was. But agricultural production, and right there in San Angelo, they have they rely on an open water conservation dam for their water supply for their town. And they had seen an increase there through the weather model. So we came back to Atascosa County. After a series of meetings and things like that, we got it started.
It's good to know.
Just because that cloud that you showed in Kendall over there, on August the 10th, that was my birthday, but I didn't get any from my side of the county. That other cloud, y'all left. The big cloud got it.
What exactly?
We try to get every cloud.
Okay, the cost of something like that. What could you kind of give me an idea on roughly what a cost would be to seed a cloud? And does the cloud actually, the height gives you more rain, but does it broaden the cloud?
Oh yeah.
So it covers more areas?
Yeah, the area increases by about 30-40%. And that's one of the biggest things we see. There's also precipitation flux, which is, it's a unit of measure over time of rainfall. And that's the biggest area we're seeing the increase is precipitation flux, because that shows how hard it's raining. And we're seeing increases of 60-70% in most of our cases. But cost per cloud, $500, $600 per cloud, I would say.
To fly a plane through there for $500?
Well, yeah, for per cloud, we're only seeding that cloud for 10 minutes. And then we're out of there, and we're moving on to the next and the next. Cost of operation, the entire from start to finish, probably $2,500 to $3,000. So when you run all the numbers and you look at how much acre feet we produce and the cost of our operation, which is a yearly operation, $350,000, $400,000. We're producing an acre foot of water for like $1.50. Of course, that acre foot of water is falling over some farm, and some of it's getting evaporated, some of it's going in groundwater, some of it's getting into the lakes or reservoirs. But that's what the cost is, and you really don't have any idea how big a thunderstorm is until you see it from the sky, and how much area it covers, and it's pretty impressive. So it's the cheapest water you could get outside of water conservation, but it's not guaranteed water.
Okay, any other questions? It's very interesting, thank you. I learned a lot myself. Okay, so possible agenda items for the next regional meeting. Cole?
So, the first meeting of the year, typically we review the officers. So there'll be a nomination and election for the executive committee. There will be,
We'll have the SAWS item or the results of the minor or major modification thing coming back, minor modification for conservation.
for the SAWS amendment, minor amendment, or whatever it comes back as. And then I'll do a brief budget overview on where we are with our administrative budget. There's no action on that item, but it's just been a standing item in the past with an annual kind of update on the budget. That's all we have at the moment. There'll be other standing items, of course, and anything that comes up between now and then. We've had a presentation request that we're going to try to get on the February meeting. But that's not done yet, so.
Okay.
The guiding principles finish up, and we have more to do on that?
No, I think we're finished. What we'll do is we'll combine them all, everything that's been approved through all the actions, and we'll get that out between now and our February meeting. We'll, make it look nice and get that out and also put it on the website. So everybody will have it as a document. Okay, anything else that anybody would like to bring forward?
I'd like to announce the next week is the Texas Water Symposium at Schreiner University. It will feature the climate and water in Central Texas and planning for a changing resource. It's our 10th year in partnership with the Schreiner University, Texas Public Radio, and Texas Tech. And many of you have appeared on the panels, and we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Remind us, Charlie, it runs then the following Saturday at
Next
noon?
Saturday, it's broadcast on Texas Public Radio, depending on your location and from where it's broadcast, the time will change. It will be listed on the website.
But in San Antonio, it's at noon, isn't it, on Saturday?
I believe so.
All right, any other public comment from anybody? All right then, we stand adjourned. Thank y'all.
Oh, no.